आप देख रहे हैं सरमस्त पोएट्री ऑफिशियल हक की आवाज रूह से रूह तक।
Live. 14 seconds. Finish. Turn the micro. Display chat. Settings. Pause. Button. Your front facing camera view. Clock. Win. 6. Colon. It's studio. WhatsApp. TikTok. Keep note. My 5. YouTube. Record. Chat. Settings. Insta reader.
डियर व्यूअर्स, अगर आप हमारे चैनल पर न्यू हैं,
Insta reader.
चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर लें, लाइक कर लें और अफ्तार का टाइम हो गया है।
Go to page. Edit box. Settings. Tools. Play. Button. My audiobooks. Sad. February. Mostly sunny. 26. Colon. 0. In studio. WhatsApp has 4 notifications. TikTok has 90. Keep notes. My 5. YouTube recorder chat. Setting. Insta reader. Insta reader.
डियर फ्रेंड्स, अगर आप चैनल पर न्यू हैं तो चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें। आपकी सपोर्ट हमारा एतमाद है, हमारा हौसला है और हमें मोटिवेशन मिलता है। और आपको सपोर्ट सिर्फ इतना करना है कि चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर देना है और एक लाइक ठोक देना है लाइव स्ट्रीमिंग को और शेयर कर देना है लाइव स्ट्रीमिंग को। और कमेंट सेक्शन बॉक्स में अपनी कीमती राय का इजहार ज़रूर करें। अपना नाम बताएं और शहर और अपने मुल्क का नाम यानी कंट्री और सिटी लाजमी बताइएगा।
My audiobooks. Heading. Search your audiobook. Create new audio. Read standard. More options. Read more options. Read process. More options. Read more options. Read Mericalic. More options. Read house requisition. Speech rate 38%. Speech rate 42%. Speech rate 46%. Speech rate 51%. More options. Read the same. Speech rate 56%. Speech rate 62%. More options. Read Ladies Argument. More options. Button. Read the story of Answer underscore. More options. Read Virtual Training audiobook. More options. Read the life story of Answer. More options. Button. Read life story of Answer season. More options. Button. Read side background ENT audiobook. 0.25 seconds left. Button.
हमने डियर नाज़रीन एक सिलसिला शुरू कर रखा हुआ है ऑडियो बुक का। आज उसकी तीसरी किस्ताम आप पेश करने जा रहे हैं, टेल मी वाई।
More options. Button. Read basic computer MCQ. More options. Button. Read 105. More options. Button. Read 500 button general knowledge. More options. Read the same on PDF audio. More options. Read Amber Amber Imagine. More options. Read Tell Me My Audiobook. More options. Read Tell Me My Audiobook. 5 hours 14 and 42 seconds left. Button. Current page 193. Total pages 375. Tell me why.
And here, I'm guessing. The number plate matched. It's no coincidence. It's Harvey's all right. Can't wait to meet her. Harty reckons she's hot. Are you still going on? Slam. Franklin feigned surprise. He accelerated. The gear spread over his partner's lap, tumbled everywhere. They navigated the Berg Square roundabout while Slam browsed. Let's hover near the school crossing and scare em into doing 40 clicks, Franklin suggested. Lunny's had complaints from the lollipop lady again. His mate cocked his head, so Franklin added, we all know the old girl's pretty easygoing, so when she says she's sick to the eyeballs of hoons, it must be bad. It's the mums doing the school drop that are the worst offenders. Franklin nodded. Speeding, double parking. Slam clicked his fingers. That's it. You wanna do the school patrol so you can pick up a yummy mummy. You dirty bastard. And what would your girlfriend from Melbourne think? That deserved a backhander. Page 194. Custom was slow. By 9:45 a.m., the partners had cautioned a couple of harried mums and were on their way back to the station. They received an urgent call out to a West Street address familiar to Franklin. Unaware if the offender lurked, they flicked on lights and siren and tore away. The police truck screeched to a stop outside the humble brick veneer and the two cops alighted. A woman and baby wailed inside the house. Slam and Franklin exchanged glances. Franklin extracted his baton but held it in his offhand and close to his thigh. Both rested a hand on holstered weapon. A man shouted, also inside the building. The cries halted, then the child howled louder, while the woman yelled something unintelligible. Up. Dread balled in Franklin's gut. He swallowed and bellowed, police, open. The baby quietened. Wait or force entry, Franklin considered the risks. The decision was made for him. Christina Van Hokel threw open the door. She glared. Her face was red, puffy and wet with tears. A pink singlet stretched over her huge bosoms. Yellow slimed her front, red specks stained the slime. About bloody time, she bitched before doing a double take of the baton in his hand. She registered the gun draw stances and snapped, you won't need your fucking guns. Franklin slipped the baton onto his duty belt and relaxed. Out of Christina's line of sight, Slam lifted his eyebrows and swiveled his eyes towards her and downwards. At first, Franklin thought his mate was ogling her boobs. Then he noticed her hands. The shakes weren't remarkable. The fresh nicks were. She's all yours. The speaker dripped sarcasm, added a lip curl and a soft snort. Page 195. Franklin recognized the man from his previous visit and held up a hand. Wait here, we'll have some questions. It's got nothing to do with me. That right, Christina? Distractedly, she flapped a hand. No, he didn't do anything. Franklin let him go for now. The bloke pushed past and tossed Christina another contemptuous glance. He strode to a car parked in front of the neighbor's house and slammed the door. Franklin wondered if it signified the end to their love affair. Christina watched her boyfriend speed away and then she resumed her wails. When she stamped her feet in a toddler's tantrum, Franklin wanted to shake or slap her. He did neither. Slam cleared his throat. Franklin introduced his offsider, then prompted, "You reported an attack, Christina." Still hysterical, she led them down the short hallway to a bedroom. There, her baby shrieked between hiccups. His face was bead red. Shards of glass lay at the foot of his cot. The ragged curtain over his window fluttered. Christina's breath shuddered. She worked to compose herself. Look at this. She picked up a large honeycomb rock. Fragments and blood flecked its surface. It just missed poor little Bales. Curiously, she didn't go to her child. Franklin lifted him from the cot. Bailey gazed with saucer eyes, then snuffled into the blue shirt. Franklin stroked the boy's back. He doesn't seem to be hurt. The asshole just missed him. Poor little Bales. Christina dropped the rock, missing her toes by centimeters. She wrapped arms across her chest and chafed her hands. You want a coffee, Christina? She nodded a yes to Slam, then stared at where he'd stood while he clattered nearby. In an eerie monotone, she said, I was in the kitchen and heard this big crash. Page 196. At first, I thought something had exploded. Then I realized it sounded like glass breaking. Bailey howled and I spilled his food all over me. She gestured at the goo on her top. A bit went on the floor. I was glued to the spot. Then I snapped out of it and went to go to Bailey's room, but I slipped over on the stuff I'd spilt. Dazza came running out of the shower and we got to Bailey's room at the same time. I saw the torn curtain, glass everywhere and a hole in the window. I couldn't look at Bailey's cot. I was so worried what I'd see. She faced Franklin. Do you get what I mean? He pictured the recent car and minibus accident. The way he'd switched to autopilot to face the carnage, although it didn't stop him being sickened by what he'd witnessed. Yeah, I do. The baby rubbed a fist into his eye. Franklin thought he'd soon be asleep. I screamed and picked up bits of glass with my hands. I got all these cuts and that freaked me out even more, so I flicked the blood off my fingers. It went everywhere. Darren slapped me, and yelled at me to shut up. He told me to shut Bailey up too. I peeked at Bales then, and I saw he wasn't hurt. I nearly wet myself. Relief, you know. She waited for his nod. Coffee's ready, Slam called. Franklin turned to the doorway. Christina's sudden grip startled him. She gestured towards Bailey. She took him and smothered her child's crown in kisses. She sniffed his downy hair and wet it with fresh tears. It's not fair. He could have hurt my baby. Who? Christina, you know who's responsible, don't you? He said it as a statement, not a query. It's not kids, like you said on Tuesday, is it? She tightened her arms around Bailey and brushed past. In the lounge room, Slam had arranged mugs and biscuits. The two cops sipped coffee and watched Christina rock her baby. She murmured a non-stop mantra, incoherently. Then she fixed on Franklin. I'll talk to you but not him. She pointed at his offsider. Franklin tried to reason with her. It was useless. He lifted his palms to Slam. Page 197. Once Slam had retreated to the truck, Christina said, I don't know who did it exactly. All I know is that he calls himself Solomon. Franklin choked on biscuit crumbs. I've had letters from this creep. He wrapped one around the rock today too. Christina placed Bailey on his playmat and disappeared. She returned with a bundle of crumpled notes, the topmost dirt and blood-stained and more wrinkled than the rest. Before Franklin read the letter, she said, I wanted to tell you on Saturday. When he wrote on my car bonnet, a town hall, with lipstick and then broke all the windows. And he wrecked Bailey's capsule. Why would he do that? She waited for Franklin's reply. He shrugged, for lack of a good answer. But then I got scared and all mixed up, she continued. What if going to the cops made him even angrier and he did something worse? So I rang to tell you to back off. But at the same time, I kinda didn't want you to listen. I wanted you to keep going and catch the creep. But I didn't think he'd go further than smashing up my car. I never expected he'd do this. You know, actually attack me or Bailey. That's his jack of it. He reckons I'm too much of a liability with a sicko stalking me in Bales. She broke off, crying. Franklin scanned the letter. Whore, you're evil. You sick and good Christians are a home wrecker and besmirch our society. You are not a clean or worthy woman and you do not live virtuously. Every day you live is in sin. I am angry that you have not responded to my letters. You have not changed your ways. I told you to atone, whore, but you have ignored me. Adulterous women shall be punished. You will pay for your sins. You and your bastard. Solomon. Page 198. Some Christian. Christina sniffed. This guy must live in the dark ages. How's that? I'm only doing what most women would. Franklin forced his brows not to rise. So I like men. And don't mind if they're married. So, that's his wife doesn't satisfy him, and I can. No strings. Perfect relationship, Franklin said dryly. Even as he said it, he acknowledged he had no right to judge Christina. Not for being an unwed mother, promiscuous or sleeping with a married man. Not for anything at all, unless she broke the law. Pity Solomon's worldview was so skewed that he didn't realize the same thing. As such a devout Christian, why didn't he leave it to God to sort out Christina? Why target the baby? And, more importantly, did the rock miss Bailey's caught by luck or design? Solomon had raised the stakes. Why? What had pushed him beyond his nasty little letters? And how close was he to the edge of the abyss? What would he do next? Would he kill? Worries and pieces of the riddle preoccupied Franklin after he and Slam left the Van Hokel residence, even while they interviewed the few neighbors who were home. Well, are you going to tell me what else is going on? Slam asked. Huh. Don't act the innocent, mate. There's more to this story than a random rock through the window, isn't there? Franklin dodged with, bloody typical that nobody saw or heard a thing. It always amazes me. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak to no cops, except about what's common knowledge. Oh, well, that means less to write up. Page 199. Yeah, that's true, Slam brightened, then reverted to his earlier train of thought. What were you scribbling in that daybook of yours? Franklin ignored his buddy. He tuned out the police radio. Trees flicked by, their leaves browning and dropping. Page 200. Chapter 24. He had too many questions and too few answers. Meanwhile, Solomon's actions had taken an ominous twist. Franklin had hoped for a break in the case, a tie between the women other than the Ballarat Base Hospital and that they were single mums in Dalesford. As yet to run it by 3 of the mums, he only had a 50% strike rate on Art Hammer so far. Kathy had never met the bloke. Christina had been harassed by him at various pubs but thought he was all talk and no action. As for Earl Blue and his odd behavior at the Dalesford Community Church, Christina didn't recognize him from the photo, and she had no connection with the church. The bugger hadn't phoned him back either. He needed to follow up with Blue and check back with the other mums on both local wackos soon. Okay, so what did he have right now? Bailey Van Hokel, aged 5 months, born at the Trenton Bush Nursing Hospital. Significance: Solomon's games dated back to at least October, and the hospital link was demoted to tenuous at best, unless a staffer worked at both Ballarat and Trenton. The person could be an agency nurse or aide. Shit, that could mean more hospitals and more victims. Franklin jotted a reminder to check the agency angle. The letter-wrapped rock was the work of a psycho who'd scrutinized Christina subsequent to sending his initial letters. Who'd witnessed her relationship with a married father of 2, along with, as the latest gossip had it, Page 201. Another couple of local blokes. That someone apparently blended in so well that no one on West Street noticed him that morning, either before or after hurling the rock. Presumably a local, could even be a neighbor. Franklin added the idea to his book and rechecked his interview notes. Christina wasn't part of a mother's group and went to a different medical clinic to the others, whereas the women all visited the maternal health center and a number of the same local businesses. But what if Solomon lacked official association with any of these? How would Franklin narrow in on him? And what if Solomon was a woman? Not much would surprise him in this perplexing case. He debated whether it was time to get the suits involved or share his inquiries with the Dalesford team. Franklin was loath to do either. Christina had begged him not to divulge the Solomon stalker aspect of the case. Brazen she may be, but she didn't fancy being dubbed the whore who copped a rock through the window, particularly as she hoped to talk Darren back into her bed. Franklin ticked off a mental list to justify keeping quiet. He figured Christina, Taylor and Lauren could fend off gossip mongers if it came to it, but he'd protect Kathy Jones's privacy wherever possible. Besides, the crime investigation unit was perpetually busy and under-resourced, so they would handball it back to the local uniforms. This would mean more meaningless paperwork and delays as they battled interdepartmental, bureaucratic bullshit. What could the CIU detectives or his workmates do that he wasn't already onto? He still had Blue and Hammer to chase and the mums to re-question. It wasn't serious enough yet to necessitate upscaling the investigation. He and Slam went through the usual motions in a criminal damage case. They hadn't done any less than required due to Franklin's omission. On a personal level, the case was big and exciting. Chilling, but exciting. Franklin resolved to hang on to it a little longer and see if he could crack it. Then he'd establish if he possessed aptitude for sea work. And if he did, what then? Well, it might not be too late to apply for the suits in his 40s, when Cat grew. Page 202. More independent or left home. The certainties in life were death and taxes. And change. You always needed to be ready for change. Donna had taught him that one early on. Maybe he should give her a call and thank her. One day. Jenny Maguire reminded Georgie of a horse. She wore a chestnut ponytail drawn back from a long face. Her laugh was a bray crossed with a neigh and seemed more to do with a nervous disposition than a happy one. She pulled up outside the Hepburnshire Advocate in an older model Ford Telstar sedan, its gold-brown Duco faded and patchy. That Georgie had waited outside her office at 9 a.m. had visibly thrown the journalist. She'd probably anticipated an uneventful Thursday morning in sleepy Daylesford. Georgie considered Daylesford anything but sleepy and uneventful. She didn't personally know people in Melbourne with underworld connections, yet they were behind every fence post here. You want to see our archives? Maguire repeated, incredulous. Aren't they computerized? The journo's mouth twitched. Depends. These days, yes. A few years back, not so much. What period are you looking at? 5 years ago. Maguire gave a shrug. Paper archives then, Georgie added, unless you have a copy of the local hero article you wrote on Roland Pentecost handy. A blush spread over Maguire's face and neck in ugly blotches. It resembled red ink diffusing on tissue and fascinated Georgie. But when she didn't answer, Georgie acted offhand. Doesn't matter, I'll have a peek at the copy around that time and find it. I guess the Pentecosts cropped up in the paper a lot back then. What do you expect to find? Page 203. Georgie blew out a breath. I'll know when I see it. What's it to you? Are you doing a story on it? Maguire fingered Georgie's business card. She reread, freelance writer and editor. Not sure, Georgie again replied candidly. There could be a story in it. Perhaps she'd toss out the novel in progress taking up her bottom drawer and adapt this real-life drama. Resigned, Maguire grabbed a set of keys and jerked her thumb. Georgie tracked behind down a corridor and into a dungeon-like room that smelled musty despite the newness of the Advocate building. Maguire indicated the approximate starting point and stomped away. Georgie faced an array of boxes and sighed. Then she set to work. Several of the boxes were incompletely labeled, which made a tedious task torturous. But she eventually located the relevant carton and carried it to the tiny laminate-top desk on metal legs flanked by a low-backed, hard plastic chair. Rather than jumping to D-Day, Georgie selected a pile of papers within a 3-month period from 1 month before the fire at Abergeldy, in order to picture the township. No mean feat as she had to arrange the papers chronologically first. Finally, the newspapers were organized, yet she procrastinated. She considered Maguire's question. She asked herself what she expected to find. Her honest answer was nothing. Stuff all, but she needed to go through the motions and hope to stumble across a clue that would piece together the jigsaw. It appeared that stumbling on information could be her forte. For a non-local, the contents ranged from unremarkable to laughable, with a few in the totally cringeworthy category. A substantial percentage of each weekly edition comprised real estate adverts and trade classifieds. Tourism matters rated of crucial importance and often covered opening pages. A host of local organizations advised on events, issues and projects. The police reported crime statistics, prevention and other community topics. Hot news tended to be the wins of local identities, from record sales at the stockyards to a debutante making good at the trots. The local births, deaths and marriages section contained unflattering photographs, humdrum stories and... Page 204. Complex pedigrees, free legal advice, a television guide and gardening column were regulars towards the back. Public notices outnumbered the negligible employment opportunities. Predominantly male sport commandeered the rear spread. The personal ads engrossed her the most. Seeking same-sex, swingers and the Sagittarius. Whatever turns you on. Among the drivel, Georgie discovered various mentions of the Pentecosts in the context of their farming and community involvement. No hint of entanglement in scandal, controversy or legal dispute. She reached for the edition around the date of Roly Pentecost's disappearance and coincidentally his interview with Maguire. Her temples ached and she massaged them. Maybe her eyesight was affected because she had to scan the paper again. Franklin tapped his fingernails impatiently. Each ring made him more certain he'd be unlucky yet again. But as he was about to hang up, he heard, Blue Residence. Hello. He identified himself and asked for Earl Blue. The woman hesitated. What's this in relation to? I'd like to speak with Earl. He's your son, yes. Yes, she sounded even cagier now. So I'd like to speak with your son about some incidents in town. Have those radicals from the community church stirred up new trouble for him? This is not in relation to the community church. Why would you think it might be? They caused him trouble last year. Other way around, as Pastor Danny told it, and he knew who he trusted. But whatever they're saying about him now, it isn't true. How can you be certain until you know what it's about? He felt baffled. Page 205. Has this got anything to do with White Lake, Wisconsin? Wisconsin in America. What the fuck is she on about? Franklin didn't have control of this conversation, and he reckoned that Earl Blue inherited his nutter genes from his mother. Mrs. Blue laughed a brittle, high chortle. My Earl is at a Christian camp in Wisconsin in the good old US of A. And before that, he was at a conference retreat in Ohio, and before that he was doing some schooling over there. Franklin wondered, is she setting up her son's alibi here? Casually, he asked, when was he at home last? He crossed his fingers, kind of wanted Earl Blue to be his crook at this stage. Just after that pastor, she spat the word, from the so-called community church kicked him out. She paused, then added, end of September last year. Franklin screwed up his mouth. If Mrs. Blue's claims were corroborated, Earl Blue could not be Solomon. He could not have tossed the rock through Christina Van Hokel's window or trashed her car from America, and the letters were postmarked locally, so he couldn't have sent them either. Earl Blue might be off the hook, but at least Franklin still had his prime suspect, Art Hammer. 3 checks confirmed her eyesight wasn't faulty. Although the fire broke out on Sunday evening and the Advocate went to print on Monday, the paper had managed to feature the event at Abigail D on page 1. An image of frantic efforts to contain the blaze covered 3/4 of the page, while the editor's text embellished the scanty details available. Ironically, a short article on page 3 reported the huge success of a Rotary Club meeting and dinner on the Saturday night before the fire. An accompanying photograph depicted Roland Pentecost, his arms slung around the shoulders of Lewis Davis and a Bill Noonan. Doug McDougal linked to the human chain via his mate Davis. Page 206. Georgie noticed the second and final week dinner package at windows on Vincent that Susan and Rowley took up on the fateful Sunday evening. What was omitted interested her more. Maguire's local hero piece on Rowley had presumably been postponed in the reshuffle. One other article caught her attention. It had Maguire's byline. Local man killed in hit and run. A 28-year-old local man was the victim of a fatal hit and run on Lower Raglan Street, Dalesford at approximately 9:40 p.m. on Saturday evening. A male witness attended to the victim while waiting for the ambulance. However, the man lost his life before reaching hospital. Police are appealing to the driver to come forward or for anyone with information to contact officers at the Dalesford station or telephone Crime Stoppers. Callers can remain anonymous. The man who arrived at the scene shortly after the accident is not currently available for further questioning. Georgie heard an echo of Pam Stewart's words, that Rowley had gone to the aid of an accident the evening before the fire. She supposed he was the unnamed witness. Vexed at time wasted on reading instead of action, she flipped through the successive editions. She found articles Susan had clipped, and a follow-up piece on the hit and run that named the victim as Joseph Bigotley of no fixed address, whose mother lived in nearby Creswick. After refiling the papers, she exited the dungeon. A surly youth with numerous piercings manned the reception desk. Georgie interpreted through hand signals and shoulder shrugs that Maguire was on a mission, probably. Page 207. Avoiding her and the question, why did the Advocate dump a feature on Rowley Pentecost? Such a story would have been timely while debate about the local personality thrived. But more urgent questions screwed Georgie's brain. Why the journalist didn't name the accident witness, what she knew about Joseph Bigotley, whether the culpable driver was ever arrested, and what she thought of the allegations against John Schlicht, aka the Iceman, in particular about his part in Rowley's supposed murder. She planned to interrogate Maguire face to face. Her fiery blush and body language were liable to reveal more than she articulated. Georgie leaned against the Advocate's exterior and noticed a police wagon whiz past. She speed-dialed a number and lit a cigarette. First, they exchanged greetings. Next, she put her request to Matt Gunnison. Matty, I need a favor. Burst my bubble, why don't you? I thought you longed to hear my sexy voice. She visualized his eyebrow wiggle. Oh, if I didn't live with your brother. Anyway, much as it's always fun to talk to you, this is serious. Fire away, G, what you got? Something right up the alley of an intrepid crime reporter. Georgie gave details of the hit and run. Although it could prove irrelevant, the timing and vagueness of the Advocate's report intrigued her. She could almost hear Matty's back crack as he sat taller, hooked. He promised to research the tabloids. What else can I do? She grinned. He was just a little too eager. It would be a race to see who wrote the story first at this rate. Page 208. After thinking on it, Georgie also solicited whatever Matty could rake up on. Jenny Maguire, the local journo made her antennae twitch. Page 209. Chapter 25. Fucking hell, what's she up to now? Franklin pulled a U-turn at the roundabout and headed to the Coles car park. He zoomed into an empty space near the Advocate and slammed his door before McSprade closed his folder. Hoy, Harvey, I've got a bone to pick with you. The writer dropped her cigarette and ground it with a sandaled heel. Her eyes bored into Franklin's. They were deep brown pools that may as well have been steel shutters. He couldn't fathom her thoughts. Yeah, I planned to drop by today. You saved me the trouble. Cocky bitch. You could face charges for your little efforts at Abigaildy the other day, Ms. Harvey. What? Break and enter, unlawful entry, theft. You've got to be kidding. She looked shifty saying it. Come on, guys, Slam murmured. Calm down, will you? So, what have you done about Susan? Harvey demanded. Found her yet? There's no reason whatsoever to be concerned for Susan Pentecost. The moment he said it, Franklin felt a tad hypocritical. Only yesterday he'd told Lunny things weren't kosher at Abigaildy. Incensed? No, he couldn't backtrack. Thought as much. Done nothing. Right. She dropped her voice but not the. Page 210. Exasperated tone and proceeded to update him on what she'd learned so far. Franklin shook his head. He caught a glimpse of Slam watching them both with a grin. He'd no doubt be on the blower to Hearty as soon as this was over. So, Harvey challenged, am I the only one that realizes Susan's behavior is connected to her husband's murder? What? He repeated Georgie's earlier exclamation. She spouted her far-fetched theories, then asked from left field, how can I get in touch with Bill Noonan? Why, so you can harass him too. Franklin exploded. What's my old boss got to do with your crackpot ideas? Crackpot ideas, my. Calm down, you two. Slam tried to pull Franklin away. Everyone's watching you make dickheads of yourselves. Franklin scanned the area and saw he wasn't exaggerating. Blood rushed to his face. He swallowed his retort and signaled a truce. Agree to disagree, he suggested. She fixed him with those sphinx-like eyes. Without severing scrutiny, she tapped a cigarette from its packet, lifted it to her lips and cupped one hand as she flicked her lighter. Her pupils reflected the flame. She drew back, the tip of her tongue pointed between her teeth. Puckered lips blew a stream of smoke in his direction. She'd no doubt intended to be insolent. Yet for some strange reason, Franklin found the gesture immeasurably sexy. And that made Georgie Bloody Harvey even more infuriating. Even if she hadn't recognized Douglas McDougall from the Advocate's photograph of the four middle-aged Rotarians, Georgie would have been tipped off by his prominent Scottish brogue. She accosted him in the banking chamber as he conferred with Banker 2. Cornered, he agreed to an interview. Though a reluctant host, he was a gracious one. Of course, that could simply. Page 211. Be the country way, and would account for the thicker waistlines on country folk than their city opposites sported. In any event, McDougall plied his visitor with coffee and jam tarts before they got serious. Lewis Davis may have warned his pal about Georgie, but that didn't mean McDougall was prepared for her questions. Can you describe the last time you saw Rowley? The banker's nose turned pulse red. Oh, fuck, he started to bawl. Men weren't supposed to bawl. Georgie would have coped better with anger. She averted her gaze. He's dead. It's not fair. The bastards. They murdered him. His accent grew stronger and harder to decipher. Georgie passed a box of tissues from his desk and wriggled her toes as a distraction while the Scotsman recovered. Eventually he took a hiccuping breath and lifted his head. Who murdered him? She scanned his reactions. Schlicht and his gang. McDougall's face blanched, then flushed. He exploded into another bout of sobs. I don't know, he replied. He seemed sincere. There were no evasive or guilty tells that Georgie could distinguish, so she steered him back to the day before Rowley disappeared. If I'd known, we had a grand night. Lewis, Billy, Rowley boy and me. We had our meeting, the Rotary meeting, and later on, we went to the pub and downed a few ales. It were about 9 o'clock when we got there. We spent the next hour or so together and Rowley left about 10 or a wee bit earlier. You're certain of the times? He squirmed and confessed, as best I can be sure. We have our usual habits and I cannot recall it being different, so I think it's a fair estimate. Douglas, do you know what Rowley did after he left the pub? He had to park on the lower end of Raglan because the streets were packed when we got there for the meeting. On his way back, he came across a man who'd been run over. Georgie's spine tingled. Joey Biggagly. McDougal considered the name and nodded. Page 212. She urged him on. He explained that Rowley had stayed with the inert Biggagly until the ambulance arrived. Bill Noonan was the Dalesford police sergeant back then and a friend of the Pentecosts, plus a fellow Rotarian. When Rowley called him directly after reporting the accident, Bill rushed to the scene. Later, Rowley had gone home to Susan in bed. Do you think this accident involving Biggagly sparked what occurred at Abergeldy the next night? McDougal raised his palms, then dropped them on the desk. Georgie tested an alternative motive. Can you think of anything controversial involving Rowley or even Susan at that stage? Say, anyone they were feuding with. Number. He were well respected, everyone liked them both. Did you see him on the Sunday, the day he went missing? Number. We had a wee talk on the phone, chewing over this poor Joey Biggagly fellow. Mind, everyone were talking about it in town. We woulda caught up on Wednesday, like usual. We always met at my place on a Wednesday to play a few hands of cards and for a wee drop of single malt. He smiled at the memory of a happier era, then the corners of his mouth drooped. What's the relevance? Not sure yet, Georgie admitted, but things are beginning to click. There has to be a connection between this hit and run, what happened to Rowley and whatever Susan is up to. McDougal reacted by bursting into tears again. Georgie mumbled that Susan was bound to be fine and left. Fortunately for McDougal, the vertical blinds afforded privacy to his office. On the downside, the man's breakdown prevented her questioning Lewis Davis's hostility. And why Douglas McDougal had avoided her previous visit. He'd whacked Georgie's face as she left the frigid bank. It had to be the hottest day in ages. Something else whacked her. She'd not asked McDougal how to. Page 213. Contact Bill Noonan. She'd made yet another bloody stupid mistake. Should she return to find out? Georgie winced and climbed inside the spider, determined to find an easier way to locate the retired policeman. No more man tears today, please. A loop past the advocate confirmed Maguire remained AWOL, so she took a pit stop. Any news, dear? Georgie slipped through the cottage's entrance with a headshake. She fumbled inside her handbag to dodge the changes in Pam Stewart. Susan's friend was as immaculately dressed and coiffed as usual. She still moved with the elegance of a dancer, but she seemed smaller and fragile. Nothing your end, then. The older woman answered with a grimace. As she loaded Georgie with food, Pam bombarded her with questions. Georgie began her update and soon lost her appetite. She pushed the club sandwich aside. Throughout the account, Pam's expressions oscillated between wide-eyed disbelief, laughing delight and tearful despair. It exhausted Georgie to watch. Clearly her report had been information overload for the older woman. Or that was how she justified her omission of the threat left on the spider's windscreen. Bill Noonan, the ex-policeman, I wish I could help. Pam tugged at her elegant blouse. Its sequined waistband skewed to the side. Really, Bill and I and his wife, Gabby, we've little more than a passing acquaintanceship. I can't recall whether they live here in Dalesford or nearby. I have never needed to phone them myself. Bill and Rowley, on the other hand, they were like this. She held up crossed fore and mid-fingers. Soon, they digressed, as they generally did. You and Adam, dear, how are things at home? Confusing, good, better, overall. I guess I haven't told him much regarding this flictangle, yet. Much. Page 214. Nothing, Georgie confessed. He wasn't too happy about my run-in with Roger and Mick. He'd spit it at a whiff of organized crime and might try something stupid like telling me to leave it alone. And that could be the snapping point in our relationship. Pam patted her hand and clucked. Why do we tell strangers things we scarcely admit to ourselves? Georgie tore off a crust and chewed without tasting. Screw that, Pam's not a stranger. She rose, things to do, people to see. She refused a bed for the night. She preferred the anonymity of a motel where her irregular comings and goings wouldn't disturb anyone. Besides, she couldn't function without nicotine, the single vice they differed on to date. Blast Margaret, Pam explained as they walked towards Georgie's car. If only she'd pick up the phone. She must have seen your note. You'd think so, and that one phone call could solve this whole thing. I wish Susan had told me what she planned to do. Or kept in touch while she's away. We must keep trying 'em both, dear. Let's ring 'em at every chance. We'll strike it lucky sooner or later. Look at the progress you've made already. Hell, yeah, great progress. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Damn shame it wasn't the other way round. Franklin ducked out when Slam was busy. He'd logged a phone call to the camp where El Blue supposedly lodged, but at around 11 p.m. last night in Wisconsin time, and he didn't expect progress on that for a while. Something about Mrs. Blue's eagerness to supply itinerary and relevant contact details for her son convinced him she was telling the truth, but he'd go through the motions to exhaust the line of inquiry. Right now though, he visited Roz at the Wombat Arms. Dear Franklin. Page 215. Nah, thanks. Still on duty. She leaned across the counter and brushed strands of her auburn bob behind her ear. What can I do you for, then? Art Hammer. Her facial expression changed, but he couldn't interpret it. Seen him lately? Some of the other local publicans haven't. You don't know. Roz pivoted her head to check the patrons. All were happy for now. Know what? He didn't like where this conversation seemed headed. Poor Art died. You're kidding. Heart attack while he was giving them heaps at the Radio Springs. Shit. Poor bugger. Roz nodded. The man may have been a pest, but she clearly had sympathy for him. They took him to hospital, but he didn't make it. Franklin's mind jumped. He rode out as far as Lionville on his pushbike. Apparently so. Roz straightened. She crossed her arms. The man got about. Shit. Franklin repeated, still stunned. When did this happen? How did I miss it? About 3 weeks ago. A punter called for a drink. Roz turned to serve him. Meanwhile, Franklin calculated back 3 weeks. It tallied with Kat's suspension from school. He'd obviously taken his ear off the ground while preoccupied on the home front, if he'd been told he hadn't taken it in. And that was right when Pastor Danny had been interstate. If he'd kept his mind on the job better, he wouldn't have wasted all that effort trying to find a dead man. And he may have nabbed the real Solomon by now. Page 216. Cow dung, sweet hay and sweaty armpits. Despite standing a good 3 meters from Mick and Roger, the combined odors were heady. She had seen the men notice her car draw up the gravel driveway and likewise caught the glance as she entered the paddock via a large gate that squealed on its hinges. Yet, now they ignored her. It pissed Georgie off. Mind you, she reckoned it was a cumulative bad mood, chiefly caused by her earlier clash with senior dickhead John Franklin and the Man Tears encounter with Douglas McDougal. Or had she turned anti-male? No. She was confident that Matty would come through with his promise to fax his finds to the awful but cheap motel where she would again kip for the night and ring with more information that evening. So she wasn't about to spurn anyone based on what swung between their legs. Hey, Mick, Roger, could we have another chat? At the sound of her voice, Trigger lifted his head and stared. Mick scowled and muttered. Roger removed his battered hat and scratched his scalp. Neither of the men looked her way. Susan hasn't shown up, has she? Georgie persisted. Nope, was Roger's sparse reply. He fiddled with the windmill parts strewn over the ground. Okay, time for plan B. Georgie retrieved a bag from the Spider's passenger seat and returned. Look, I've got nice cold cokes here. Why don't we call a truce and I shout you for info? Roger and Mick ogled the cans and traded glances before nodding. They sat on the open tailgate of the ute and sipped the soft drinks. Father and son appeared relaxed, but Georgie positioned herself ready for a quick getaway and furthest from the vigilant blue heeler. What can you tell me about Rowley? Too open-ended, her question dangled. She tried again. I gather he was a nice guy and everyone got on well with him, as they do with Susan. Georgie cringed at her reference to Rowley in past tense. She hoped for once to be wrong. Page 217. Yeah, Mr. P was a great bloke, said Roger. A great bloke, Mick echoed. Those few words suggested that they, added to her, Pam and McDougal, thought of Rowley in past tense. Already more information than she gleaned from the farmers 2 days ago. Unsure if they would remain cooperative, Georgie repeated the question causative of a 50-cent sized bruise over her collarbone. What do you think happened to him? Dunno. Did he have dealings with John Schlicht? She thought Mick flinched but couldn't be sure. Can you think of a reason why this so-called Iceman from Melbourne might have harmed Rowley? Nope. Frustrated, Georgie tried a wild card. Was Rowley mixed up in something even a little bit dodgy? Roger pulled his mouth into a straight line and scraped the toe of his right boot into the dry ground. He dug a small hollow. His son wiped a bead of sweat off his nose. Georgie swore silently and persevered. Was he involved in a business deal at the time of the fire? The veneer of cooperation dropped. Roger bristled and Mick glared at his father, as if to say, I told you so. Georgie brushed aside the question with a sweep of her hand, vowing to tack back later. She gave them an easy one to calm the strained atmosphere. I know that Rolly went to the Rotary dinner on Saturday night and on his way home he came across Joey Biggedly, who'd been in a car accident. Right. Roger's shoulders loosened. Yep. As he felt the tension leave his master, Trigger's chin dropped onto outstretched paws. So what did Rolly get up to on the Sunday? Anything out of the ordinary? No, don't think so. I think we all did the usual round here. Don't ya? Page 218. Reckon, Mick. His son signaled agreement. The dog sighed. Georgie's peripheral vision caught his eyelids drooping. So, you guys were working the farm back then. She knew this but wanted the men to stay chilled. Yeah, but then we was laboring for the peas. Mr. P did all the work with us, but these days we run the place, kinda. Georgie pressed on. You took over with a leasehold a few years after the fire. Had you planned this with Rolly? I mean, did he plan to hand over the run of the place when he had? Mick nodded emphatically. Trigger groaned in his sleep. Roger hesitated and said, not exactly. Dad. Son, it was bound to come out. Thought it would have been before now. Georgie frowned to conceal her excitement. She sifted her previous questions and the farmer's reactions. She hazarded, working on a business deal with Rolly. Sort of. Mick drained his can and squeezed it into an aluminium wad. Not a happy chappy. What was the deal? Roger scratched his scalp again, examined his fingernails and flicked gunk from under them. He faced Georgie. She was intrigued to literally see his forehead smooth, with relief. My old lady cleaned us out when she upped and left us, and our little farm was all we had. Was small, but it had a little house, nothing fancy, but it did us. And the bank was gonna foreign, you know. Foreclose. That's it. Georgie guessed, so Rolly helped you out with a loan or gift that would get the bank off your back. Yup, he gave us 20 grand. That kept the bank sweet, and we got to keep. Page 219. Our place. We'd still help here, but we'd never not want to work here. He gazed at the emerald landscape fondly. We hadn't worked out how we'd repay Mr. P. He said he didn't care. Then the fire happened and Georgie tried to understand their motive. And you haven't mentioned the loan, or gift, or whatever you want to call it, because the police might have treated you as suspects in what happened to Rolly. Or were you worried that Susan would ask you to repay it? After a long pause, Roger said, I dunno. We couldn't pay it back and didn't want to talk about it, I suppose. Was embarrassing having to take Mr. P's money in the first place. It wasn't just that my old lady took off, we got in trouble on the Gigis too. You nearly lost your farm because of horse gambling. Maybe her voice pitched, because Mick interjected, we don't take a bet much anymore. Yeah right, mate. Mick's deep. Whether because of the fib or their secret. Everyone has their demon lifetime. Asked us to take over the farm. It's a bit like double. She don't want. And we've never about the 20G. Okay, that's all together. Done and dusted for now. But you owe me. What happened to Rolly and what Susan's up to, I think they're connected. She scrutinized their faces. Are you still holding back something that might shed light on this? Nup, but if we did know something, we'd tell ya. From Mick, this was a breakthrough. And the hit and run. Is there a link, do you reckon? Page 220. Unfortunately, Georgie struck out. Can't see how, replied Roger. Can't see how, echoed his son. The motel manager matched negativity with obesity. He wore filthy clothes that didn't flatter his bulk and grunted with the effort of rising from his chair. When he had to refill the paper in the fax machine, he moaned. Then he blatantly read her message as it slowly printed and held it for ransom. $4 a page. A rip-off. They exchanged cash for the crumpled sheets that had absorbed his skin oils. He slapped the key to Unit 10 on the counter. You have to get your breakfast menu back here by 6:30 tonight. A whole 16 minutes and crap choices. She'd skip brekkie or go into town. The thought of food tempted her to the Wombat, to down a hearty steak and a few beers. Instead, she kicked off her sandals and sprawled on the bed. Its shiny purple eiderdown, complete with stains and holes, rivaled its burnt orange counterpart in Unit 6. She smoothed out the wrinkles and rued the oil patches but managed to read Matty's fax. It was an extract from the Herald Sun. Police warn drugs, fatigue and speed are taking toll. It has been a horror start to the weekend on Victoria's roads. In 2 separate incidents, 2 lives were lost, and 3 teenagers remain in critical condition. A dangerous joyride in Frankston resulted in a fatal collision. Page 221. Involving a freeway overpass last night. The unlicensed driver, aged 16, was not wearing a seatbelt at the time of the accident and died instantly. His 3 young female companions, aged between 14 and 16, sustained grave injuries and are in critical condition at Alfred Hospital. Police are also investigating the death of 28-year-old pedestrian Mr. Joseph Biggagly of Creswick, who was struck by a vehicle in Dalesford at 9:40 p.m. yesterday. According to Mr. Roland Pentecost of Hepburn, who was a witness to Mr. Biggagly's accident, the victim lost consciousness when emergency service personnel arrived. Mr. Biggagly died before reaching hospital. Anyone with information in relation to the Dalesford incident should contact police immediately. The road toll now stands at 71, which is 11 more than the same time last year. A police spokesperson has expressed alarm at this increasing trend. If under the influence of drugs or alcohol or when fatigued, and warned against using mobile telephones while operating vehicles. It is probable that one or more of these factors contributed to yesterday's tragic fatalities. Very interesting. The Herald Sun had published more information about the fatality in Dalesford on the morning following the incident than the local rag managed by Monday. That seemed significant. It all did. She just didn't know how it fit together yet. Page 222. With more questions than answers plaguing her mind, Georgie quit the motel. Page 223. Chapter 26. Much later, Georgie awoke, disorientated, confused as to what roused her. It took a moment to recall where she was. Back at the crummy motel. Georgie sat upright on the double bed. She strained to listen and see. Her eyes grew accustomed to the dim light penetrating the flimsy curtains and the clock radio that glowed 11:59 p.m. A bad dream. What if it wasn't? Goosebumps pricked her skin. Although situated on one of the main drags into town, the motel had minimal passing traffic at night, and the units were set back. It was doubtful that road noise had stirred her. As far as she knew, only hers, the manager's residence and one other unit were occupied. She pulled back the curtain. Unit 1, non-smoking section, in darkness. Ditto the fat manager's house and the rooms between. The car park contained her Spider and a Volvo outside the first unit. If the manager had a carport or garage, it must be attached to the other side of his place. Georgie dropped the curtain. It's nothing. Go back to bed. She snuggled under the bed covers and squeezed her eyes, willing sleep. Fuck. There was something out there. Or someone. Footsteps. Page 224. She lay rigid as her pulse thudded in her ears. She told herself to calm down, blamed a stray dog for the crunch of gravel and forced life into her frozen limbs. She tiptoed to the front door, but each step sounded too loud. Georgie slipped the security chain in place. The snick of the chain resounded through the unit. Her breaths turned shallow and fast and audible. She checked the button on the front door. Locked. She couldn't remember if the bathroom window was shut. It was even darker in there, so she crept with hands outstretched. She misjudged the layout, bashed her shin against the toilet and stifled a curse. She eased down the lid, stood on it, reached for the window. As she wound it in, she heard a new noise. Georgie stilled before cranking faster until the window shut firm, then snuck to the bedroom. She pushed the sole armchair against the door. It was a slow, terrifying maneuver. The heavy chair grazed the industrial carpet. The scrapes were a shrill beacon that announced her location to the intruder. Georgie reached for her phone. The front awning rattled. She fumbled the mobile and it fell to the floor. Shit, she whispered, dropping to her knees to grope for it. More footsteps in the gravel. A pause, then a metallic scrape. A key, or pick inserted the throat of the door lock, wiggled and withdrew. Her fingers struck and then wrapped around the mobile. Another key twisted in the lock. She remembered with horror. Matty rang after she'd returned from the pub. The phone beeped and disconnected. She'd stupidly let her battery go flat and come to Dalesford without the charger. She dropped the useless handset. Georgie heard a muffled cuss and the jangle of keys. She cursed choosing a motel so cheap that the unit didn't have a landline. Not that it made much difference. The part-time cop shop on Camp Street would be as empty as the room next door. When help arrived from Ballarat or Castlemaine or wherever, she would be dead or have dealt with it alone. Page 225. Well, I opt for the latter, thanks. Despite her brave internal dialogue, with each of the intruder's moves, Georgie grew more scared. She grabbed the home brand fly spray and Bible. Motel room trustees, practical weapons. She heard a rough male voice. Her nerves screamed. She held her breath again until her lips numbed. Breathe. Be quiet. Another man replied. She strained. Did she recognize the speakers? Impossible to tell. They seemed to be arguing outside her window but quietly, so as not to rouse the occupant, her. She couldn't decipher what they said. The men's voices became fainter. There was a cuss and scuffle in the gravel, and shortly after, the distant sound of an engine. Then, quietness, blissful fucking silence, except for the pounding in Georgie's veins. She sank onto the floor and hugged knees to her chest. Her entire body jittered. You will only get one warning. Was she on borrowed time? Eventually, her eyes fluttered. She jolted upright, sucked in a breath and listened. Her smokes lay on the bedside table. A short distance away, but 2 attempts to work her jelly legs failed. She gave up. Soon, her chin dropped. She vowed to stay awake, then caught herself coming out of the next doze. Page 226. Part 3. Page 227. Friday the 19th of March. Page 228. Chapter 27. This wasn't a time for regrets. Regrets served little purpose in any event. But one thing kept rolling inside her mind. If only she hadn't involved her niece. With her sharp sparrow features and sometimes intolerant attitude, many didn't see the woman beyond her niece's outer crust. They didn't know the kind, generous person so like a sister to her. That bond swelled and tugged when pressures of past weeks threatened to burst. At her niece's home, she'd been nurtured, humored, cajoled, nagged and loved. But that doubled her predicament, not halved it. Contrary to popular opinion, a burden shared is not lessened in its load. There are always consequences. The Barina's bonnet felt cool. Checkpoints, late model buzz box, immaculate conservative navy blue Duco, matching interior. Exactly the type of car Georgie expected Margaret Pentecost to own, but simply that it was parked outside her house didn't mean it was hers. Her car might be in the rear garage. Georgie wondered at the woman's silence to the note stuffed under the door on Tuesday. Maybe she was too tight to make a phone call, or she'd tried. Page 229. Georgie's mobile since its battery went flat. Both were improbable. She searched for alternative explanations and tried to talk herself out of bad omens. A male voice made her jump. Loath to admit it, she'd been rattled by the motel disturbance. It had her flinching at shadows, and the postman's cheery hello on his early round of Ascot Street South. She smiled to the fluoro-vested man. He leaned over the scooter's handlebars with a small bundle of mail. After he'd whizzed away, she flicked through the letters. All addressed to Miss M. Pentecost and from banks and superannuation funds, nothing juicy. Georgie debated, drop them in the box or hand them to Margaret when she answered the door. She decided on the former. If her bone knickers in the spare room at Abigaildy were any indication of character, Margaret would take offense at Georgie handling her mail. She banged the brass door knocker several times. You who? The neighbor. You back then, the woman called. Her boots bounced as she jogged into the yard. Before Georgie replied, she rushed on, did you catch up with Margaret the other day? No. Oh, what a shame. I told her that a girl you came calling before lunch on Tuesday. But I didn't have your name. So silly of me. They did belated introductions and Georgie asked, do you know if she's home now, Megan? Well, that's her car there. Megan Frawley pointed to the Barina. So I'd say so, the neighbor continued. Although she quite often walks up the street instead of driving. She hardly ever works on Fridays, so I'd expect her to be in this early. She isn't answering. Georgie barely said, no, before Frawley elbowed past. She rapped on the door and hollered, yoo-hoo. Margaret, are you there? Her ears ringing, Georgie commented, is she deaf? Too gullible to read her dry undertone, the woman replied seriously, no. Page 230. Then said, well, she could be at work, after all. The accounting firm, you know. She waved towards Sturt Street, maintaining the fast flow of verbal diarrhea. She goes in Monday, Tuesday and Thursday, although she does change the days occasionally, and she's also on council, and that keeps her going left, right and center. Of course, she could be gadding about with Auntie Susan. Adrenaline coursed through Georgie, Auntie Susan. But Frawley continued without pause. But if they're out together, they'd have to be in Susan's car, I guess. Although Margaret much prefers to drive herself. Frawley laughed. She moans about climbing into her auntie's truck. Accountant, buzz box owner, sensible undie wearer. Yep, she'd bitch about traveling in a four-wheel drive. Frawley recaptured her attention. Mind, I haven't seen Susan since the night before last, when we had our usual Predina sherry. Georgie tried to dot point the information suddenly coming thick and fast. She wasn't there last night, but she's been staying with Margaret for, the past week or so. It's such a treat for Susan to stay so long. She normally stops a day or two and then, whoosh, off she goes, back home. Frawley added, I guess she's gone back now. Georgie shook her head. Without an operational mobile, she'd resorted to a payphone to check with AJ, the Pattersons and Pam Stewart for updates on Ruby and Susan. Ruby had improved overnight, but there was zilch news on Susan. Oh, Frawley reeled. Well, perhaps she stayed with Margaret again after all. You know, she said, leaning in. I thought I heard Susan's truck last night. Outside Margaret's here. She gestured to the space behind the Barina. Quite late it was, too. It rumbled there for a while, and I peeked out the window, but it wasn't Susan's. It was a utility, not like hers one bit. The rumbling you'd troubled Georgie, although she wasn't sure why. Frawley puffed her chest and flanked her belly with both hands. Bully for them if she stayed again. They must have patched things up. Page 231. Georgie lifted a brow. Oh. I think they had a tiff, the neighbor confided. Night before last, they swung between a little touchy and too polite. I recall thinking they must have had a Barney or were bone tired from all the gadding about. They've been out more than they've been in this week. This explained why it had been impossible to reach Margaret, but her disregard of Georgie's note still grated. You know, Frawley repeated, the other day they went away for a night, on the spur of the moment, it seemed to me. I fed Topsy and turned the lights on and off for Margaret. We do that for each other. Georgie perked up. You have a spare key? Frawley nodded. You should pop inside Margaret's, to check she's okay. The neighbor screwed her nose. Well, you think Margaret's home but she's not answering, right? So, what if she's fallen over, broken her leg and can't move? Wouldn't she want you to check in case of emergency? Frawley's blue-green gaze lost some luster. She was torn. What would it hurt? Georgie urged. A quick look. If she's not there, she needn't ever know. If she is, she'll appreciate your concern. She couldn't pinpoint why it felt crucial to convince Megan Frawley. Still debating the right course of action, the woman returned to her house. A few minutes later, she shut her front door. Her movements plunged into slow-mo. Frawley hesitated at Margaret's gate. She examined the key in her right hand, then walked up the short pathway and thrust the key into the lock. She extracted it and turned to Georgie, saying, I'm not sure. She bit her lip. Georgie took her hand and guided it to the lock. She nodded encouragingly, wanted to scream, open it. Instead whispered, it's the right thing to do. Go on. The neighbor rolled her eyes. Up, down, sideways in both directions. Page 232. Georgie did a mental fist pump when Frawley finally unlocked the door. But her excitement waned as she stepped onto the polished pine floorboards and called, Margaret. No answer. The women quickly eliminated the front two rooms. They moved down the hallway and exchanged a glance. Frawley pegged her nose. Their footsteps faltered. Cold sweat dotted Georgie's lip. Dread settled like a brick in her gut. The next door on the right sat ajar. I'm not going in there, Frawley said. Yet, she shadowed Georgie as she pushed the door with her toe. It swung open. Frawley screamed, and Georgie recoiled. A beige shoe lay on its own near the doorway, and its pair sat a few feet away, still attached. Margaret, the other woman shrieked. At least it wasn't Susan Pentecost. Georgie looked at the body, then away, shocked. She gulped bile, fascinated and appalled. Her eyes crept back to Margaret's waxy, slightly bluish skin. Vacant stare, milky glaze, light cataracts. She reached towards Margaret's neck to check for the carotid pulse that wouldn't be there. Frawley followed Georgie's fingertips, which trembled on the verge of contact, arrested by jagged abrasions and deep bruising. The blood drained from her face. She reached horror saturation point. Georgie led her to the bench on the veranda, loosened her blouse and rubbed her back. She waited until the crisis elapsed, swallowed back another rush of bile and re-entered the house to dial the police. Fucking idiot for letting the mobile run out of juice. The bloody operator wouldn't let her tell the story. They followed their stupid script while she tore at her hair. But then she decelerated. Poor Margaret was beyond urgency. As she spoke more slowly and clearly, she noticed a doormat inside the Page 233. Entrance. After eventually hanging up, she lifted the mat and sighed. On the honey floorboards were one business card and note to Margaret. Well, that was a minor mystery explained. Margaret had never seen Georgie's message. Now irrelevant, she pocketed them. Georgie sat next to Frawley, who'd heaved her breakfast onto the lawn but now appeared more composed. Questions begged answers and the clock ticked until the cops flocked. Did you see the driver of the ute that stopped here last night? No. Could you tell if it was a male or female driving? Frawley did a mute headshake. Were there passengers? You think that the driver was Margaret's killer? It was pointless mincing words. Potentially. And I didn't do anything. I let them drive away. Frawley paled to eggshell and wailed, no. Sympathy would reduce the woman to a useless puddle. So Georgie pressed on, can you describe the ute? Its make and color? Not really. Try harder. The neighbor screwed her face. It might have been a Ford, but it could have even been a Chevy or Dodge. Not new but not ancient. I'm hopeless with cars. I think it might have been black, but it was dark, so it could have been deep blue or even red, I suppose. I didn't have my specs on. I'm a little bit night blind. Meaning you could have seen a Bigfoot 4x4 monster truck and be clueless. Frawley became too distraught for continued questioning, and Georgie couldn't trust herself to speak without grilling. So, they waited in silence. Page 234. Chapter 28. The first cops on the scene separated Frawley and Georgie. Then, as the area swarmed with uniforms and officious plain-clothed personnel, they were whisked to the nearby police station. There, Georgie waited and waited, was interviewed and her every phrase probed, then forced to wait further. Eventually, a two-finger typist who couldn't spell words with more than double syllables prepared her statement. The detective took her through it. She signed and escaped. Georgie was exhausted, thanks to fuck all sleep, dealing with Mr. Plodden being a witness in a homicide. Outside the cop shop she considered her battle plan. Her head pounded and her stomach growled. Her car was about a kilometer away, outside what used to be Margaret Pentecost's home but was currently a crime scene. It had been a fucking awful day so far. She hated the country, she wanted to return to the city and immerse herself in normality. But this thing wasn't over. Susan Pentecost was still missing, out there somewhere, along with her Land Cruiser. It wasn't over until the proverbial fat lady sang. How's Ms. Reiter then? She cringed at the familiar voice yet noted the inflection on Ms. was less pronounced than before. Reluctantly, she met the stare of the arrogant cop from Dalesford. John Franklin. In jeans and t-shirt but definitely not a figment of her overwrought. Page 235. Imagination. Her fucking awful day had gotten worse. When Franklin spoke again, he surprised her. I heard on the grapevine what went down at Margaret Pentecost's. Your name came up. I thought we should sit down, have a calm chat and exchange info. What do you reckon? She couldn't reply, literally too dumbfounded and drained. He rested his hand on her shoulder blade and propelled her several blocks. They'd missed the lunch crowd and took an outdoor table. A lone woman sat inside the cafe amid shopping bags, sucking up a milkshake in a tall silver cup. Franklin ordered while Georgie contemplated his shift in attitude. Minutes later, fat sausage rolls, yo-yo biscuits and steaming coffee arrived. They didn't speak while they devoured the food. Plates emptied, Georgie fumbled her lighter and Franklin leaned across. He lit her cigarette, then his own. She inhaled the distinctive aroma of his Marlboro and drifted to long summer days at Mentone Beach, when her dad was alive. Memories flickered through her mind. Golden daytime ice creams, hot golden sand, coconut fragranced sunscreen. One final dip in the warm salty water amid shrieks of laughter, the panorama tinted by a fiery sunset. Suddenly, Franklin climbed a notch on her approval rating, to hover above total asshole. A bit of sustenance, smoking her dad's favorite tobacco and an offer to share information only went so far. He had a lot of redeeming to do. He shut up and listened to her story on the whole, which earned him extra points. Every so often he lit a Marlboro or rubbed his hand over his hair. Sporadically, he interrupted with a question, and once, he patted her knee. She didn't know how to take that. Was it a come on, a put down or his attempt at kindness? She liked to be in control when it came to men. This one left her alternately stumped and exasperated. At the end of her narration, Franklin remained silent with a finger hooked. Page 236. Under his nose and thumb propping his chin. After some moments, he massaged his temples and said, "We should talk to Bill Noonan." Just yesterday he'd refused to help her contact the former police sergeant. She replied sarcastically, "Really? I would never have thought of that. And he smiled wryly. Franklin stalked ahead, leading her in the direction of the cop shop. Then he veered towards a white SS Commodore, an older model still in good nick. As he drove Georgie to collect her car, he said, "Bill took early retirement 3.5 years ago, 'cause Gabby his wife gave him an ultimatum. Let it go, retire and have a life, or she was going to have to move on." He grunted softly. It takes a lot for a copper's wife to do that. Either your marriage stuffs up near the beginning or it stays solid. Gabby's one of the best, so if she couldn't hack it after 20-odd years, that tells you how bad Bill got. Georgie suspected he'd just shared on a personal level. She wanted to probe his cop marriage but instead asked, what was Bill obsessed with? Franklin parked outside the cordoned-off scene on Ascot Street South. He faced her and answered, vindicating his good mate Rowley, proving he had nothing to do with the fire or attack on Susan. And finding Rowley's killer, could Schlicht have done it? Yes. Georgie. It was the first occasion he'd used her name in a non-adversarial tone. She kind of liked the way his bass voice played with it. At least the Iceman finally copped a stretch in jail. To do with? No. Worse luck, Franklin interrupted with a headshake. Unconnected. He went down 18 months after Rowley vanished. He's at the Newcastle main jail now. When they're coming up for release, they ease them out of the system by sending them close to home. His time's up soon. So he can't be behind Margaret's death. Or Susan's disappearance. Page 237. Franklin snorted. Never say never. Anything's possible. He couldn't have physically killed Margaret, but that doesn't mean he didn't orchestrate it. Georgie realized he hadn't contradicted her assumption that Margaret's murder and Susan's absence were connected. And he'd silently agreed that these events linked to Rowley's much earlier apparent murder. She didn't know whether to crow or shit herself. Page 238. Chapter 29. Georgie tailed Franklin to Muskvale, a little place on the Ballandalesford Road. They convoyed up a short gravel driveway to a white weatherboard and red tin-roofed farmhouse. Various roof pitches were evidence of a series of extensions. Its homeliness appealed to her. She stepped out of the Spider and scanned the farm. Precise rows of lavender in rich, red soil filled a large paddock adjacent to the house block. Further afield, black and white cows munched and viewed the newcomers. On the right, a couple of horses ran, graceful and free-spirited. As she watched them, Georgie breathed the fresh air deeply, letting it relax her. It smelled like more rain on the way. A woman called, "Hello." She approached in blue jeans and a black t-shirt with a long faded logo. She held a white plastic bucket of feed in one hand, flattish cane basket with a layer of eggs in the other. Franklin broke into an affectionate grin as he lifted his hand. She juggled the bucket to wave back, her face splitting into a beam. Georgie's first impression of Gabby Noonan was a good one. Second impression, brilliant. A generous measure of neat scotch was what Georgie needed. Not to have to ask for it, a bonus. A freshly scrubbed Bill Noonan joined them shortly. Franklin's ex-boss was stocky with a balding crown. Saddlebags under his eyes and a plowed field for a forehead were no doubt baggage from his years on the force. Yet, his face crinkled with good humor, accentuated by upward-reaching crow's feet. Page 239. Gabby potted in the kitchen that adjoined the living room. She listened but said little. Bill perched, both hands on his knees as if ready to spring. Franklin sank into the deep couch, one leg crossed over the opposite knee, hands behind his head. Although he'd already heard Georgie's story, he listened attentively but poker-faced. She again omitted the threatening note and motel disturbance and glossed over her discovery of Margaret Pentecost's body. Gabby gave her a shrewd smile, but Georgie thought she'd pulled off a level of nonchalance with the men. Otherwise, she told it straight, with Franklin adding his 10 cents worth at the end. Bill leaned back. He rubbed a hand across his chin, its silvery white growth rasped in synchronization with his wife's rhythmic chopping of vegetables. Georgie applied herself to re-emptying her scotch glass. Mellowed by the whiskey, her eyelids drooped. Rowley was a good man. Bill's voice startled Georgie from her trance. He was a good chap with not a bad bone in his body. It devastated Susan to come out of the coma to find him gone. But worse than that the court of public opinion held him as prime suspect for the arson and her narrow escape. Riveted, Georgie put down her glass despite the tawny mouthful left in the bottom. Utter rubbish, of course. Any person who'd ever met Rowley could see that. Fair call that us coppers are the worst for assuming anyone's capable of anything. Franklin nodded and Gabby snickered. But that's a hazard of the job. You have to be cynical, and you have to trust your gut. Some people are rotten to the core, while others will cross the line occasionally or have the capacity to. Then there's the last, smallest group. The ones who are good right the way through. Rolly is one of those, absolutely and. Page 240. Unequivocally. Georgie noticed Bill's tense switch, past to present, confused about Rolly or in denial. He tugged the corner of his eye with his right index finger. The Dalesford team tried to convince the hierarchy that they'd got the wrong end of the stick and to look at the evidence more carefully. Unquestionably, Susan was meant to die in the fire. It didn't take us long to realize that Rolly had probably been knocked off. We expected his body to turn up in due course, but it was bloody impossible to get the Ds to focus the right way. The detectives, Franklin interjected. He glimpsed Georgie's nose twitch and corrected. The detectives wasted too much time and effort suspecting Rolly and then, he finger snapped, their resources dried up. Too bloody right, Bill agreed, picking up the story. So I started doing a lot of unpaid overtime, trying to work it out myself. Eventually, I was asked if I wished to consider a transfer to South Gippsland. A place in the sticks. Perhaps Fish Creek. You've got to be kidding, Georgie explained. You'd better believe it, Gabby replied, and Franklin smiled crookedly. Our lives here, Bill continued. Gabby's family is a stone's throw away, and our kids have settled between here and Melbourne. I'd worked a few stations, but the majority of my time as a copper, the best bits overall, was at Dalesford. He puckered his lips, and sir, I took the hint and quietened down. Didn't give up but tried to be more discreet. Still, Gabby here gave me an ultimatum. And rightly so, because in hindsight, I came this close, he held gnarled thumb and index finger millimeters apart, to losing it. I would have done practically anything to solve Rolly's case, except have to hit the singles scene in my late 50s. A tea towel struck his ear. Bill glanced at his wife, who laughed at his weak joke. It broke the tension before he launched back into the story. Susan's been to see me quite often since Rolly disappeared. Wanting. Page 241. Updates. Reassurance that something's happening. Over and over, she's said, all I want is to bury him. Give him a proper send-off. It's enough to break your heart. She became so desperate that she wrote a letter to the paper and later tried to see Schlicht in jail. When he refused to see her, she wrote to him direct. 5 letters, I think. Gabby's knife clattered. William Noonan, you never told me that. Georgie pictured the Iceman. She tried to imagine writing to him or wanting to visit him in prison. Ugly thought. Yeah, well, Bill shrugged off his wife's comment. Anyway, she pleaded with Schlicht to tell her the location of Rolly's body. Promised to keep whatever he told her in confidence. She would have kept her word, too. But he never answered her letters. Georgie chewed her nail and skimmed from Bill to Franklin. Unreadable faces, except for the cold anger in their eyes. Bill continued, once, much early on, I found a chink in his armor. Ha, Gabby hacked into a pumpkin. He lifted his palms to the ceiling. I couldn't help it. I got so frustrated that I leaked a little information to the advocate. He repeated the thumb and finger gesture. Then the media had a field day, and so did Schlicht solely. Georgie nodded, recalling Susan's clippings. One reported accusations from Schlicht's pompous solicitor of trial by media, and if she remembered rightly, in the same article the head of the homicide squad admitted they'd stalled in the Pentecost case. She watched Bill's face flame. Her stomach knotted in sympathy. The retired cop said, the Iceman derised himself enough to say how distressed he and his friends were at this so-called discrimination and the abuse of his privacy. He proclaimed his innocence and that we, the police, wanted to fit him up, no matter what or how. Yeah, right, Gabby retorted. Georgie studied the 3 faces, relative strangers, from a different world, and her path only crossed theirs through Susan's story. She didn't know them well enough to be sure Bill or Franklin wouldn't fit someone up, especially if. Page 242. That someone was the Iceman, and especially to vindicate a mate. She fixed on Gabby's disgusted expression and reckoned she trusted the woman's judgment. Franklin took up the narration. The police commissioner at the time had a political agenda. All this bad publicity wasn't doing him favors. He did a quick step to placate the civil libertarians and told us hands off Schlicht and his associates. He also put a plan in place that was supposed to show off a squeaky clean force. Funnily enough, it backfired when a bunch of corrupt big knobs were uncovered, who in turn ratted out a number of others on their way down. End of the day, Schlicht copped minor drug charges as a token conviction. And he's due for release any day, Bill added, slamming his hand on the chair arm. But mark my words, I'll see him go down for what he did to Rolly. And I hope Susan is there to see it happen. Right, his wife interrupted. Georgie looked at Gabby squarely and made out the faded logo across her chest. Be reasonable, do it my way. She squinted to read the next line of smaller, cracked embossing. For women who take no crap. She clicked with Gabby even more for that t-shirt and wondered where she could buy one. The woman grinned, as if she'd read Georgie's mind. She said, "No more talk until we've had dinner. Bill, take these kids for a walk while I finish up." Nobody argued. Maybe they'd read her t-shirt too. Georgie gulped fresh air and half listened to the men as they strolled around the farm, but her mind bulged with information overload. They knocked back 2 bottles of red wine with a veritable feast of organic stuff from the Noonans' property. Franklin talked about the daughter he was raising single-handedly. It showed another side to his character, and Georgie covertly scrutinized him. His face animated, his laughter deep and natural. He described cat scrapes and monumental, often instantaneous, mood swings. She sounded like a normal 15 going on 25 girl, wild hormones, constant testing of the boundaries, mouthy smart aleck 1 minute, her nice self the next. Page 243. Georgie was the first to admit she'd been a bitch at 15. She couldn't rewrite history but tried to be a better daughter to Livia these days. Franklin glided up a notch on her approval scale, though his rating was still tenuous. They tidied up, then retired to the living room. Georgie broached the question that had been on her lips since they'd arrived at the Noonan farm. "Do you think Susan's okay, Bill?" He rubbed his chin. "It doesn't look good." Franklin agreed. Everyone brooded. Georgie sucked in a breath and took the plunge. She finally fessed up about the note and previous night's disturbance at the Dalesford motel. "Righto," Franklin yelled over exclamations from their hosts. "You're backing off right now." "Okay." He leaned into her personal space. His breath was warm and held tangs of wine, onion and coffee. It disturbed the wisps on her forehead. His agreeability rating nosedived. Bill paled to match his thatch of white hair and said, "I'd have to agree, Georgie. You're dealing with violent scum here, and if they're onto you poking around, it isn't bear thinking about." Gabby finished his sentence. Georgie was furious and embarrassed. "Breathe. 10, 9. Counting down to 1, she then asked Bill, "When did you last see Susan?" Her change of tack flummoxed the men. It was Gabby who replied, "A couple of weeks ago, wasn't it, Dal? She stayed for dinner and then kept you up chatting for half the night. I ended up going to bed." 2 weeks ago tomorrow, Bill hazarded. His wife agreed, "I'd say so." "She's keen to have another go at seeing Schlicht in jail," the old cop recalled. "The anniversary of Rowley's disappearance is coming up, and it always makes her toey. John here keeps me in the loop on developments, but there's been none in ages. Basically, Susan and I rehashed old ground." Page 244. "More than a coincidence, then," Georgie mused. "The very next day she goes to Margaret's, stays a few days, then drops off the radar. Meanwhile, Margaret is murdered," Franklin snarled. "Get it, kiddo? This is serious shit. You're better off not knowing more. I offered to share info, to see what you had, but that's it." "Oh, so your idea of sharing was a one-sided deal. I'd tell you everything, you'd tell me as little as possible, then I'd crawl back to Melbourne, huh? Fat chance. This isn't a game, a chance for you to mount your high horse. Butt out and leave it to the experts." Franklin stalked outside, slamming the door. "I'm involved, whether I like it or not," Georgie said under her breath. She refocused on Bill. "You sure you only rehashed old stuff?" He thought back. The creases in his face rumpled more. "Well, for the most part. You'd have come across Schlicht's girlfriend, Ariane Marquez, in Susan's scrapbook. Young, mad, French and crazy for him. She has a list of 4 years long," he gestured, "but all small-scale stuff going way back. Street walking, possession, that sort of thing. Years ago, she was in the frame for a vicious attack on an old bird. Snatch and grab with a bit extra, but the victim couldn't ID her, so Marquez got away with it. Then, once she hooked up with Schlicht, she got cannier and inherited his protection. Mind, there won't be much of an empire left for the Iceman when he gets out. One crim goes to the slammer, another steps up. He'll have to claw back his piece of the pie." Bill frowned, as if trying to remember the point. He bobbed his head and said, "Anyway, Schlicht and Marquez were shacked up together, living between their millionaire's palace in Melbourne and Schlicht's castle-named country house. Whenever Schlicht got pulled in for an interview, Marquez came along. Whoever she buttonholed copped an earful. Must be the frog in her. Look, I've digressed. The point is that I did mention something that caught Susan's attention." Georgie jerked straight. "Yeah. Schlicht has an estranged wife, Helena. Many moons ago she reverted to her." Page 245. "Maiden name, Watkovska, and moved with their son to a place near Trafalgar, but they've never divorced. He mentioned her in a couple of interviews. I got the impression that it was a half-assed split, certainly not acrimonious at his end. And I don't think the girlfriend knew about the wife. Not back then. That's it, Georgie deflated, perplexed as to the significance of Schlicht's wife. Bill sighed and they dropped into silence. After a gap, she asked, going back to your investigation into Rowley's disappearance/murder. Why did you suspect Schlicht? Because we knew that he did it. We even knew why and how, but we couldn't prove a bloody thing. Gabby placed a hand on Bill's arm. How's that? Georgie demanded. Schlicht was the driver in a hit-run fatality the night before the fire. The victim was Joey Biggagly, the son of one of his closest associates. Schlicht trusted Biggagly, or Little Joey, as they called him in the trade. He treated him as his own kin. At any rate, Biggagly set up in competition, and the daft bastard even tried to recruit a few of his previous boss's henchmen. What an idiot. Yep, so Schlicht decided to make an example of Biggagly's disloyalty. Confused, Georgie said, but how does that link to Rowley? Rowley arrived first on the scene of Biggagly's accident, Bill explained. Biggagly didn't die immediately, and Schlicht had broken the golden rule by dealing with it personally. Go on, she urged. Rowley was a risk, you see. Biggagly might have told him what had happened, or Rowley could have seen the hit run. Schlicht owned a XJ6 Jag Daimler with pearl white paint. Jags are a rarity hereabouts, and that one stuck out like dog's balls. If Rowley saw it, he would have described it to a T. Georgie's eyes narrowed, so Schlicht removed Rowley as insurance. Yep, and the fire at Abigaildy was supposed to obscure everything. Hopefully, we'd think Rowley had incinerated or, if that failed, that he was the perp. Page 246. All the better if Susan died in the fire because of the chance Rowley had given her information implicating Schlicht. But by miracle, she survived. Gabby made a strange noise. Bill rubbed his wife's knee and said, Angelo Sartori confessed everything. Off the record. Apparently, Schlicht's gang, Sartori being one of them, set fire to the place, knocked out Susan and scooted the moment they heard sirens. Georgie murmured, and Rowley. They took him back to Schlicht's Castlemaine property, interrogated him repeatedly and, finally satisfied that he knew jack shit about Biggagly's murder, snapped his neck. Sickened, Georgie said, you had everything. Why couldn't you nail him? Why, Bill eye rolled, because before Sartori made it official, he topped himself. Or persons unknown did it for him. And our detectives were out of Bacchus Marsh, not local and overworked, lazy or crooked, take your pick. Maybe they were under pressure to let things lie. Maybe they'd been offered a transfer to Fish Creek or another fucked place. Bill grunted. Whatever the reason, I had nothing to back me up. All I needed was a bloody warrant for Schlicht's car and his property, but the commissioner personally knocked me back. Whether he was on the take, he lifted his palms. With our star witness dead and some of our evidence having mysteriously vanished from what should have been secure storage, he reckoned I didn't have probable cause. That sucks. It sure does, Gabby agreed. Worse still, the hierarchy accused me of having a breakdown or at least a warped perspective because Rowley's a close mate. Even when the press picked up a scent, my crew couldn't get the help we needed. Nobody would touch it with a 10-foot pole. Once I'd been offered the transfer, everyone became too shit scared to openly pursue it. Even John and my other mates stepped back. Page 247. They'd fallen quiet for a while. Georgie was processing what she'd learned. So, have you come to your senses and decided to back off? She swiveled, startled by Franklin's voice. He'd slipped into the room and propped against the wall behind her seat. He rubbed his temple and added, or do you reckon you can solve it alone now? His tone lacked the earlier sting, and she didn't bother answering, mainly because she was clueless what to say. Her mind reeled with too much information, the reverse of a few days ago. How did it all fit together? What was Susan up to, and where was she? Why had Margaret been killed? By who? Was the aborted break-in at the motel connected? And with that and the written threat linked? If not, then Georgie had more than one foe. You'll be staying overnight, Gabby broke into her thoughts. She stood. You can't go back to the motel. Whoever it was last night may well return. Georgie couldn't face another sleepless night in the motel or driving back to Melbourne in the pitch black of the country. She didn't even fake a protest. She followed Gabby to a spare bedroom filled with toys, posters and general grandkid clutter and found herself with a cordless telephone and her host's blessing to call whoever she needed. She ticked off a mental list: Pam Stewart, Bron, AJ and the Pattersons, and heard Franklin's car fire. She dismissed the resulting mix of relief and disappointment and dialed. It was cold and dark. At first, she'd thought it was quiet too, but there were many sounds when she grew accustomed to her solitude. Birds, frogs, crickets, all soothing, and listening to them helped pass time. Rodents, possums and feral dogs made frightening noises and she tried to block them. She couldn't read her watch in the blackness or see day turn to night. But she sensed it was the day. Coincidence or fate, it didn't matter, but it was fitting. Perhaps God would grant her wish in a roundabout way. Page 248. She sighed. It turned to a gasp. Pain gripped her chest, shoulder and temple. She drifted in and out of consciousness, had bleak dreams and another turn. She awoke, fought the urge to urinate, then gave in. The first time had been the worst. Now, she knew there was no alternative, and decorum flooded to the heavens. Page 249. Saturday the 20th of March. Page 250. Chapter 30. No offense to the Noonans, but Georgie couldn't wait to escape Dalesford. Bigots and criminals, secrets and innuendo, the air here was oppressive. Thick with odious matters she shouldn't have become embroiled in. So, as she watched her host shrink in the rear-view mirror, her breathing eased. Nightmares had seen her sleep-deprived for the second night running, worse for unrelieved sexual tension. Not to mention she felt damn lost without her mobile and emails. It all made for a hell of a cranky Georgie, a jack-in-the-box ready to explode. She cleared the intimidating avenue of giant cypress trees and glimpsed pastures through tall gums. These would open to paddocks, like some cliched Australian landscape painting, then she'd reach the highway on ramp and be Melbourne bound. The car ahead braked inexplicably. She almost rear-ended it. She blasted her horn and gunned past. Fuck the solid white line. She grinned into the mirror and left the other driver for dead. Bad word choice. The Spider suddenly vibrated. She freaked. Had a tire blown, the gearbox packed up, the judders continued, she jerked to the right. The ride smoothed. Georgie spotted corrugations on the verge, designed to alert dozy drivers. She laughed, yet her fingers clenched the steering wheel. After some minutes, her grip relaxed but tension knotted her shoulders. Page 251. Music sometimes helped, singing loudly and badly, even more so. She fiddled with the radio. Still out of range for her favorite station, she killed the static and heard a truck gear down. What the hell? She glared into the rear-view mirror at a massive chrome-toothed grille. She watched it pull back. Then the truck accelerated, backed off at the last moment. Fear, fury and pig-headedness kicked in simultaneously. If you assholes think you scare me off, Georgie yelled, think again. The driver increased the gap between her convertible and his truck. A bizarre pursuit vehicle, if that's what it was. She crushed the accelerator. The Alpha shot forward. The truck followed. It nosed to within inches from her bumper. Her heart pounded. Cold sweat pulled her armpits. Outrun or outwit. Think, quickly. The Spider handled to around 175 kilometers per hour, but not on this mediocre road. Georgie yanked the wheel and hit the gravel edge without braking. The little car fishtailed. She righted it. The logging truck roared past with a blast of air horns. Oh, that'd be right, she protested. Just a truckie in a hurry. She cursed until she laughed until she hiccuped, then pulled back onto the road, in front of the car she'd overtaken earlier. Her stomach ached from the fit of laughter. Soon the hysteria gave way to blinding pain in her temple. Georgie stopped at the next lay-by, switched off the engine and rested her forehead on the steering wheel. She groped in the glove box, struck a packet of paracetamol, the one swiped from Abigaildy. She dry swallowed 3 tablets with her eyes squeezed shut, not intending to doze on the roadside but soon drifting off. She lifted her head, gazed at her reflection in the mirror and thumbed away smudged mascara. She felt no better for the kip. Harden up, Harvey. Georgie turned over the ignition and listened to the Spider's purr. Home, baby, she said, slipping onto the roadway. Page 252. Home, AJ, responsibilities other than the Pentecosts. It sounded good. Fortunately, the rest of the trip was uneventful. The headache retreated as the distance between her and Dalesford expanded. Back in her Richmond study, Georgie checked her emails, the answering machine, the small pile of snail mail AJ had placed beside the keyboard. She put her mobile on charge, impatient to check its messages. And then opened the OH&S document David Ruddick wanted yesterday. Georgie stared at the screen. The words jumbled. This time yesterday Franklin, merely to have her original, low. And this time yesterday she was only half as fearful for Susan. Georgie swallowed bile. She tapped out a string of words, deleted a block of text and undid the deletion. The ringing landline made a welcome distraction. Ms. Harvey. Yes, Georgie confirmed guardedly. Detective Kyriakos from the homicide squad, the caller rattled machine gun style. Before Georgie could reply, Kyriakos continued, my team's investigating Margaret Pentecost's murder. Georgie managed, oh. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see you in Ballarat yesterday. However, I understand the local CIU interviewed you. In fact, Georgie heard paper shuffling. I have a copy of your statement right in front of me. Georgie's heart thudded. She felt guilty of something. We'd appreciate you coming in this morning to resolve one or two discrepancies, if you would. It was a polite command. Page 253. Georgie had anticipated a breather from the Pentecost mess, but that was already kaput. Her headache not fully gone and she was up to her nostrils in crap again. Kyriakos's summons amounted to helping the police with their inquiries. Did that mean they considered her a suspect? And what discrepancies? Oddly, the detectives called afterwards. Georgie dispatched her redrafted OH&S script to Roddick and flicked on her mobile, juiced enough to check her messages. She always joked that her mobile was an appendage, but the backlog after a day and a bit off air astounded her. Georgie retrieved several text and voice messages from Matty Gunnison and one, important but not urgent, please call, request from John Franklin date stamped earlier today. Stroppy Franklin could wait, unlike Matty's belated update. She dialed him from the car, and they agreed to catch up at the Royce, a hotel opposite the homicide building. If Matty could trace his AWOL brother, AJ would join them. Georgie's energy waned. As she approached the St. Kilda Road police complex, she wished for a traffic jam hell, anything that would delay the unavoidable. No joy, she even found a 4-hour parking space immediately. Here goes nothing, she murmured, dragging her feet towards the base of Victoria's murder squad. The dirty mushroom-rendered walls with tinted windows towered ahead. She gazed up and wondered which floor Kyriakos occupied. Whoops, a man said as they collided. He juggled his pie. Georgie apologized. He grinned before taking off. She noted the piece bulging under his jacket. Cop. 3 guys chuffed on fags in the smoker's nook. She guessed they were coppers, too, because they openly examined her. One was a honey, which distracted Georgie from official matters for a minute. Who'd want to get involved with a cop? No way. A classy silver motorbike parked on the grass nature strip turned her head. Page 254. But I could handle that hot and throbbing between my legs. Her smirk faltered at the murky beige steps before the automatic doors. She aimed at blasé but blew it, wiping sweaty palms on her jeans. She obeyed the sign directing all non-official personnel to reception, but the uniformed officer there ignored her. Her eyes bored into his shaved skull while he yacked on the phone, tried to force his attention. He whinged about lack of parking near the courts for over 5 minutes, during which she shifted her weight, sighed and drummed fingers on the counter. He hung up, then took 2 calls in succession. Ah, Paseo, she said, as if struck by a revelation. Receiver glued to his ear, he looked at her. Georgie glanced at the emblem on his blue uniform and thought he caught the implication. Protective Services Officer, not a real cop. Screw manners, she interrupted. Georgie Harvey, to see Detective Kyriakos in homicide. The Paseo shoved across a clip on visitors' pass bearing her name and pointed to a black vinyl bench. She perched in front of a display case and faced a menacing balaclava-clad skull. And there waited further while road noise and wind pummeled the glazed wall behind her. Finally, a young female in civilian dress beckoned. She swiped an ID card at the elevators. The talking lift announced the 9th floor in a tinny voice of another secure zone. She sat on a bright blue sofa and checked out an honors board. The buzz of voices and frequent trill of telephones reassured her that people were on the other side of the partition. As she waited again, impatience battled apprehension. She disguised the trembles in her hand by drumming her fingernails on the sofa arm. Soon, she forgot both emotions. AJ filled her imagination. He'd left home before she returned, leaving the animals to be her welcoming committee and source of much-needed hugs. She, page 255, drifted into picturing him naked to the waist, muscles pumped. Ms. Harvey startled her out of the daydream. Kyriakos in the flesh matched Georgie's mental image. Late 30s, medium-sized, she wore wedged court shoes and a black suit. The outfit too heavy for Indian summer, it screamed efficiency and authority. Likewise the blunt hairdo framing Carabiris's implied intelligence and a no-nonsense demeanor. The detective motioned Georgie to follow. They weaved around civilians at the desks who typed furiously and talked on the phone at equal rate. Then they passed a cabinet of busts and other exhibits. Kyriakos reached a room a few meters square and waved her inside. Large windows fronted a cityscape shrouded in sunlight despite looming black clouds. 5 maroon desk chairs clashed with the predominantly beige, black and blue decor of the police complex. A workstation and computer dominated dead center of the room, both beige, of course. The artwork consisted of a small Monet print hung too high to appreciate. "We're here to concentrate," seemed to hum from the computer. Although the room wasn't as officious as she'd expected, Kyriakos was. Georgie sat where pointed to and tried not to fidget. The detective shuffled papers without eye contact. The air conditioning recycled the warm computer, stuffy room and tinge of perspiration smell peculiar to sealed offices. Despite the balmy atmosphere, Georgie shivered and clenched her jaw to stop her teeth chattering. "Right," Kyriakos said, leaning back. "You can expect to return to see the team handling the inquiry into Susan Pentecost's potential disappearance. In the meantime, we have issues to iron out, haven't we?" Georgie shifted. "There is a fundamental discrepancy between your statement," Kyriakos pointed to the copy before her, "and that of Megan Frawley. Do you know what I'm referring to?" With a shake of her head, Georgie sat on her hands so the detective wouldn't see them quiver and misinterpret nerves for guilt. Page 256. I wonder. The computer hummed while Kyriakos's words hung. "Would you care to explain your interference with the crime scene?" Georgie's mouth flopped. "What interference? What did you remove from my scene?" Bewildered by the detective's aggression and the question, Georgie spluttered, "What?" "Here's my predicament. Ms. Frawley observed you remove an item from the deceased's residence after discovering the body. Care to enlighten me?" Georgie's eyes bugged. She repeated, "What?" "An item from under the deceased's doormat. Does this jog your memory?" Georgie's guts plummeted. She hastily explained the note she'd left for Margaret and her retraction of it in her card. Kyriakos scrutinized and listened. She scratched an efficient record. "I find it remarkable that you mentioned your purpose for being at Ms. Pentecost's home to the Ballarat detectives but not your note." "I honestly didn't think about it," Georgie protested. "I was standing there, looking at this mat inside the hallway and it occurred to me that my note might be caught underneath. Sure enough, it was. So I pocketed it. I didn't consider it important." "Ms. Harvey, you understand that your actions and misleading statement have compromised your integrity as a witness. What else have you lied about?" "Nothing, nothing." Georgie muddled through another account of her actions before and after stepping into the cottage on Ascot Street South, minus all emotion and suppositions, as instructed. Kyriakos prepared a supplementary witness statement. She maintained her poker face. "Am I a suspect?" Georgie asked, anxious. Kyriakos hitched a caterpillar brow. "No, it would have been all business in that case. If this is your nice side, I'd hate to meet your alter ego." Page 257. Just then, a tall, rugged guy, 10 or 15 years Kyriakos' senior, tapped and entered the interview room. "Inspector Brian Mitchell." He extended his hand in a firm, dry handshake. "This is my show." "Ha, so much for Kyriakos calling it my scene. Helen, you all done in here? We've got to get moving." Kyriakos nodded. "I was explaining what'd differ if we considered Ms. Harvey a suspect in Margaret Pentecost's murder." Embarrassed, Georgie said, "I'm a writer, what can I say? Inquisitive by nature." "See this room?" Mitchell fixed her with an amber stare. He cocked his head and said, "This is a witness room. Compact, non-distracting, also considerably non-threatening. Agree, this is where members of the public are generally brought for discussions regarding a homicide. The victim's family, neighbors, witnesses and so on. Now, on our way out, I'll show you where you'd be interviewed if you were a suspect in one of our murders." He crooked his finger. Intrigued, Georgie followed the inspector through more clusters of desks filled with coffee cups, files and notes. By whiteboards overlaid with masses of neat notations. Near cloak stands resembling phantom people, sheathed in suit jackets, ties, spare pants, all pressed, impregnated with dry cleaning fluid and ready to grab on the way to a crime scene, airport or court. Kyriakos clip-clopped behind with a precise, determined stride. Despite his seniority and stature, Mitchell moved lively in rubber-soled shoes. They filed into a chamber with an illuminable interview in progress panel above it. Kyriakos slammed the soundproof door. "If you were a suspect, Georgie, this is what would have gone down." Mitchell paused. "I would have sent 2 armed officers to collect you from your home. The officers would have driven into the secure basement and escorted you directly into this interview room. We would have offered you the services of a duty solicitor or the opportunity to access your own legal advisor. By the time I finished, you would have been charged or arrested. Page 258. Georgie blushed. Educated via TV crime and novels as per most of her generation, she ought to have realized Kyriakos took the soft road. The tiny room had a suspended ceiling. Their fluorescent tubes were hot and cruelly bright. A one-way window faced the door. 3 basic chairs bordered the square table pushed to the side wall. No visible audio and video recording gear and nothing to comfort, entertain, distract or use as a weapon. Her visual tour stopped at the inspector's face. He hooted. Kyriakos joined in. Georgie relaxed and she laughed too. The officers escorted her to the foyer. During the lift's descent, she quizzed them on the case. Mitchell's ironic reply, no comment. They shook hands and Georgie unclipped her visitor's ID. She suddenly remembered something the policewoman mentioned earlier. You said I'll have to come back in relation to Susan's potential disappearance. Surely now it's a missing persons case. The detectives exchanged a glance. Mitchell answered cryptically, a different team is looking into Susan's whereabouts. As a missing person or a dead person? Georgie demanded. 2 inscrutable faces. Georgie had been dragged into this mess, only to be excluded. That sucked, and she wouldn't leave the building until she received assurances about Susan, until convinced the police were tracking her, urgently. Mitchell sensed her anger and stubbornness. He said, don't worry, Georgie. We're onto it, let us do our jobs. Do we have your undertaking to keep out of it? His partner added, to stay in Melbourne until the matter's resolved. Fat chance. No comment. In contrast with the detective's genuine mirth inside the interview room, this time the chuckles didn't reach their eyes. Georgie surrendered her ID and wondered if she'd see them again. Page 259. She also wondered why she felt so sad. Page 260. Chapter 31. Mid-morning and the minutes whipped by. Franklin drummed a pen on the dining table. Strewn over the pine tabletop were Solomon's poison pen letters, Franklin's daybook, Kat's Good News Bible, which he suspected she hadn't opened since her last religious education class in primary school, and a roll of Christmas wrapping paper. On the latter's plain side, he'd map out everything he knew about Solomon and noted the gaps. Plot the links between the victims. Visualize the big picture. He checked his watch. With a glance at the still blank paper, he took a mouthful of strong coffee. Come on, wake up. After dinner with the Noonans, he picked up the remainder of the late shift, running through to after 2 a.m. and then on availability until the day crew came on at morning tea. No complaints, Lunny did well to swing the switch with no notice. Franklin spent most of the slow night shift agonizing over Susan Pentecost's absence, her niece's murder and all the dire shit he and Georgie Harvey dredged up yesterday. His brain already in overdrive, the pre-dawn hours on alert to emergency calls further contributed to an exhausted insomnia. He'd eventually given up on sleep and traded bed for reviewing the Solomon case. Cotton wool brain meant it'd all too soon be 6 p.m. and time to clock on, with nothing gained. He drained his mug and slammed it down. He rubbed his chin, and reread Solomon's letters. Something bothered him. Page 261. Franklin listened and realized it was so quiet he could hear the clock tick. In a knee-jerk reaction to Kat's shoplifting escapade, he grounded her indefinitely. Scarcely a few days later and he backflipped after she volunteered to keep well clear of troublemaker Narelle King. Thus, with his daughter at Lisa Cantrell's, the house was free of distractions. No radio, nerve-stretching teenage girl talk on the phone or histrionics. Yet the wrapping paper remained blank, and Franklin's mind drifted, a piece of work, that Georgie Harvey. Admittedly, he admired her tenacity and commitment to a promise, but that promise had intersected with homicide and personal risk, and she should back off. She'd achieved her aim in getting the MISPER file upgraded. Yes, but too late for Margaret. The nagging inner voice imitated Donna. He shut it down, reverted to Harvey. If she had more sense than mulish guts, he wouldn't have to worry about hand-holding the unpredictable writer from Melbourne whenever she developed a harebrained theory. She was a liability. In more ways than one. The blank sheet glared at him. Stop fucking around, Franklin muttered after more time had sped away. He picked up a black marker. Crude flowcharts and text soon covered the wrapping paper. He shook out writer's cramp and mulled over his handiwork. Better. He rose and stretched, moved to the kitchen to boil the kettle and tapped his foot as he waited. A watched kettle never boils. A watched for woman stays missing. The mental jump to Susan Pentecost surprised him. What was she up to? Was she safe? He rubbed eyes gritty with exhaustion. His shoulders slumped. Susan was a... Page 262. Sensible woman, a strong woman, but even now he was finding out how much she hid behind a brave face. To get inside her mind was akin to cracking the Rubik's Cube, lots of twists and immense frustration. Her continued absence, especially in light of her niece's murder, worried the heck out of him. With a shot of steam and a shrill whistle, the kettle interrupted. Franklin poured water over coffee granules and made another leap. Cause. The anniversary of Rowley's disappearance. His murder. Effect. Susan goes AWOL. There's a reason for everything and a trigger for all events. Now he had to apply that logic to the Solomon case. He sat down and studied his notes until they blurred. He squinted. What was the objective of Solomon's fanatical letters? No, not just his letters. Solomon had progressed to violence. So, what drove him? Here. Cause equals X. Effect, or Y, equals the threats, stalking and assault. Bloody algebra had never been Franklin's strong point and it failed to help. To maintain momentum, he recorded the dead ends next. Art Hammer, literally dead and had died prior to Solomon's attacks at Christina's home, so he couldn't be the crook. Al Blue, alibi confirmed by reliable sources, he, too, couldn't be Franklin's man, unless Blue worked with an accomplice here in Dalesford. Franklin shook his head. Solomon's outrage at Christina's behavior was first-hand and personal, not orchestrated from the other side of the world. He pulled out a red marker. In thick chisel point strokes, he made a new section entitled, The 6 Motives. The key motives for murder had been drummed into his head during his rookie days. Franklin still remembered one of the instructors had barked, memorize them because the reasons people kill translate to other crimes against persons too. Gain, elimination, lust, revenge, conviction, jealousy, the first 3 he put in reserve. Although the case contained a sexual element, he didn't think Solomon lusted after his victims, and he hadn't demanded money. Equally, revenge seemed remote with the range of targets. Page 263. Involved. A warped ethical and religious conviction motivated Solomon, which translated to a desire to punish. That in itself presented a wide field to analyze. Franklin pondered the final motive. Did jealousy also drive him? Click the Rubik's Cube, infiltrate the mind, Solomon's mind now, rather than Susan Pentecost's. Franklin scrawled more notes. What's Solomon jealous of? The attention the mothers receive, from men and or the community. Can't he attract a partner? Makes sense. He's totally wacko. Franklin rubbed his chin and wrote, because they have a child and Solomon can't. Is he sterile, or single and therefore can't have kids? NBC linked to target, single mothers. Appended, to be gay. Pause. He scratched the paper again with, maybe he had a bad childhood. Only child of single parent and crap upbringing. Anti all single mums. Lots of maybes and not much headway. Cockhead. Don't forget Solomon could be female. Franklin's voice jarred in the hushed house. Male, female doesn't change things though. The motive could be the same. She could be jealous on the same grounds. That's if jealousy has anything to do with it. Frustrated, he stabbed the marker into the paper. He snagged the word, conviction. Apt. Georgie Harvey leapt into his brain. Damn it, why hasn't she called? Pissed off with her ignoring his earlier text message, he painstakingly keyed another and hit send. Franklin scowled at Solomon's letters. Come on, tell me what's going on here. He shoved everything aside except a clean segment of wrapping paper. In block letters, he wrote, how does Solomon know about the births? Page 264. Ah, that's the key, he breathed, then paced the floor a while. He lit a cigarette, took a pull and blew a string of smoke rings out the open window. If he doesn't work in the hospitals, how does he discover the pregnancies and or births? Franklin thought back to Donna's pregnancy and groaned. She'd bought a pregnancy test, and everyone knew within 5 minutes. Small town joys. Break it down. First to guess, the pharmacy assistant who'd sold Donna the test kit. First to be sure, doctor, medical receptionist. Next, her friends, him, yes, in that order, their families and colleagues. No obstetrician for them, not on a copper's wage, just the GP all the way through, with the help of midwives. First to see the baby, hospital staff, him, family. Then Cat became hot town property and earned gooey oohs and ahs wherever they went. Pharmacy staff, got noted under suspects but without gusto. These days you could buy pregnancy tests from supermarkets. Was he going to add checkout chicks to the list too? Besides awareness of the births, Solomon also believed the mothers were unwed. What source would reveal both? Franklin paced again. He reflected on the victims. each one individual, of different strokes. He centered on Kathy and Tyson. Cute kid, nice mum. She was so proud of her brag book. That's why they call them brag books. Donna had stuffed full an Our Baby album. Proof of how fucked up and selfish she was, she'd walked out on her kid when she walked out on their marriage, and she'd left behind Kat's baby album. He pulled it off the bookshelf and leafed through the pages. Blood test, positive for pregnancy. Photos of Donna and her ballooning belly and one with them cuddling, his hand on her bump, both tired and excited. The clipped birth notice from their local rag. A few special congratulations cards immortalized behind plastic sleeves. Photocopy of Kat's birth certificate. Photos. Page 265. Of every first event. Franklin shut the album softly. He ran his hand over the cover, wistful. Back in work mode, he mentally compared Kat's album to Tyson's. What did they have in common? Apart from the absence of a dad, Tyson's book mirrored his daughter's. How did it help? Not a bloody lot. Not everyone needed early blood tests, but ultrasounds were the norm. He jotted, ultrasound, radiology, pathology staff, under the suspect list. Department and camera stores were popular for printing photos when Kat arrived, but today people could do their own at home. So that angle wasn't much chop. What about? Franklin snatched a copy of The Advocate and flicked through. He pumped a fist to the roof. Yes. Let's see. Porter Walters. Colin and Arnica of Dalesford are pleased to announce the safe arrival of their new baby boy, Darren Oliver, born on the 11th of March. Brother to Jessica, Bo T. Full. As expected, the births column provided Bub's particulars and a photograph of mother and child, along with enough family information for Solomon to draw conclusions, rightly or wrongly. He squeezed his eyes and imagined birth notices for the 5 young mothers Solomon targeted. 5 that I know of. His stomach clenched. With Dalesford's virtual population explosion of late, how many additional mothers were victims of the malicious writer? Were there other switches from threats and stalking to actual violence as yet unknown to him? If he flunked out again today, he'd need to analyze the hospital records and newspaper archives and personally interview all relevant mums. Too time-consuming, and Solomon might escalate again in the meantime. It was imperative he crack the case before Solomon snapped. Page 266. So assume 5 for now. He fixed on the porter's announcement and contemplated what Solomon would have learned of his 5 victims from the local paper. Renee Archer's announcement of daughter Alex's birth would not have mentioned her political lobbyist husband, which led Solomon to conclude an unwed status. Similarly, lapsed Catholic Lauren Morris had probably succumbed to family pressure and avoided attention to her de facto relationship with the father of Millie and Aidan. As Solomon would have, he'd spotted straight up that Kathy Jones hadn't mentioned Tyson's father in his birth notice. The last thing on earth she'd do was ID her rapist. For little Taylor Berkeley, unashamed of being a single parent and proud of son Callum, no interpretation would have been required. Lastly, as gossip went, Christina Van Hokel had never clarified which of her numerous lovers fathered Bailey, and naming a dad could have been libelous without a paternity test. She was a surefire tainted woman for Solomon. He seized his ringing mobile, anticipating Georgie Harvey. Franklin. Lunny, and he sounded pissed off. Yeah, boss. Get your ass in here, pronto. Within minutes, Franklin stood before his angry friend and superior. You know you've got good mates in Hart and Sprague, don't you? Pretty much whatever you tell them, they treat like gospel. True, if you say jump, they say, how high, mate? You ask them to keep something mum, they do it. Hell, even if you don't tell them to keep quiet, if they gather that's what you want, they respect it. Unless one of them, usually Sprague, accidentally opens his big mouth. Right. Page 267. Franklin shifted. He shrugged. Sprague let slip about this Van Hokel case out on West Street. He mentioned, the sneaky bugger's running his own book, and then clammed up. I presume he's referring to you, Franklin, and that means you're keeping back from this investigation. Lunny drilled him with a livid stare. Franklin chewed the inside of his cheek and shook his head. Wasn't it less than a week ago that Wells made identical allegations? And I warned you that you're required to be a team player. We have to work together, Franklin. There's no room for egotism or machismo in this station. Understood, boss. Is it, I wonder? Lunny viewed him shrewdly. We're following all leads in the Van Hokel matter. If I knew who the crook was, I'd have him in here straight away. That much held true. You're not running your own crusade. No, Franklin maintained eye contact but squirmed inside. Why aren't you resting anyway? Lunny asked unexpectedly. You look like shit. This can wait. You're on at 6. Go get some shut-eye. Weariness swamped Franklin anew. He found himself nodding and promised to rest before shift start. Back home, he pushed the Solomon paperwork into the sideboard, away from Sticky Beak Cat. He dialed a number. Bloody hell, the mobile was out of range or switched off. Page 268. Chapter 32. Between. S.O., what's the goss on Jenny Maguire? Georgie asked, mouthfuls of vegetarian ravioli. She chased the flavors of olive oil, mushrooms, green olives and semi-sun-dried tomatoes with a draft of Corona. Matt Gunnison swallowed. Hold your horses, G. Let me eat first. Oh, come on, bro, AJ demanded. Yeah, I told you everything. It's your turn. Georgie gave Matty's arm a light punch. Okay. Apparently, she showed great aptitude at uni. But despite her tutor's high expectations, they didn't think she was as good as she was capable of being when she graduated. Her stint at the Advocate was supposed to give her practical experience in a rural environment, to give her writing extra insight and edge. Matty paused to slug bourbon and coke. What's really strange is that she's content to stay a hack reporter in the sticks. One of her previous colleagues at Journo I work with reckons that Maguire's pathetic. She's too scared to push people's buttons, to work the boundaries, let alone cross them. The crime reporter sniffed. So, was she paid off or frightened off? Georgie mused. She would have panicked once she connected Rowley's disappearance with Joey Bigogley's death. Sorry, Bigogley's murder, AJ commented. And back then it would have been easy enough to link Bigogley and Schlicht. Page 269. When you asked me to check into Bigogley's hit and run the other day, gee, Matty interrupted, I didn't click until later in the day. I planned to fill you in on that, plus the goss on Maguire, except you went incommunicado. She joined the dots, so it's on good odds that Maguire dumped her local hero piece on Rowley because she was scared. Worried Schlicht might take out more insurance, just in case Rowley passed on something incriminating to Maguire during her interview. Complicated, AJ remarked. That's an understatement. This whole thing is more than complicated. It's outrageous that Rowley died for no reason. And Susan. Georgie's unfinished sentence led to an uneasy silence, thankfully broken by a text beep. She checked her mobile. Ring me, Franklin. She hit delete and shouted another round of drinks. Too many people love the sound of their own voices at these gigs, AJ muttered. They scanned the foyer filled with conservative art patrons, along with a handful of eccentric artists and regular people. Yeah, your mum would fit right in. George, I realize you and mum are completely different. Can't you try to get along though? So, lunch at my parents' tomorrow. Can't make it, she grinned. I've got a lead to check out. Jesus, why can't you leave it to the police? Georgie bristled. She bit back a retort and instead walked away. AJ tagged along. You don't know where Bron's masterpiece is? He asked. No, we'll find it, don't worry, it'll stand out. Most of this stuff is. Hang on, this one's pretty good. Page 270. You reckon? Karma, Georgie read the title. Suits it. The woman next to her pulled her lips into a tight line as the bumblebee tune erupted in Georgie's handbag. Where are you? Demanded Joe Holt, Bron's partner. The foyer. Well, get here quickly. Joe gave directions and rang off. Georgie grabbed AJ's hand. You never answered me, George, he said, as she elbowed through the throng, pulling him along. What? She snapped. My parents, lunch, your plans, why you can't leave it to the cops, he spelled out. Why? She stopped. AJ crashed into her. A list of reasons hovered on her lips. Blunt was best, so she said, for Ruby, mainly. Come on, I won't do anything heroic or stupid. Okay, trust me. Georgie took off. AJ caught her hand, halting her. I'm not a doormat, George. She gazed at him, troubled by his intensity. AJ, you know how much this means to me. He puffed out his cheeks. She continued, our visit to Ruby just before. There she is, lying in her hospital bed, so frail and opposite to her normal self. Then she grabs my hand and squashes it. Why? Because she's worried sick for her friend Susan. Literally worried sick. What happens to Ruby matters to me, AJ, and the only way I can help her is to find Susan. And you know what else? I care what happens to Susan too. She's out there, she waved, and I'm scared for her. Yeah, but that's all the more reason. Comma. If I promise to be careful, can't we leave it at that? I've got to check out the few points that are bugging me. Okay. He wavered. Page 271. Okay, AJ, are we okay? What a weird turnaround to be the one asking the question. Before he responded, Georgie saw Joe on the stage with Bron behind her. She pulled him up the stairs. Bron's green eyes shone, excitement bubbled from her pores. Joe danced a jig and blocked their view until they were front and center. Adam and Georgina, Joe said with faux formality, I present to you the work of eminent artist, Bronwen Silvers. Wow, AJ gave a low wolf whistle. Georgie spotted the red sticker. You sold it on opening day. She smacked a kiss on Bron's cheek. They sobered, mesmerized by their friend's monochrome oil on wood. Its style more artistic and sinuous than realism, it whispered emotion. She'd captured late-night Melbourne in shades of grey. The famous frontage of Flinders Street Station, the streets of the cross intersection greasy, cars and pedestrians united in a quest to escape sheets of rain. Despite the deluge, a few youths hunched on the station steps with plastic bags over their heads or blowing on frozen fingers. In the background, yet vocal to the painting, a girl, tiny, fragile, malnourished huddled against a pillar of the arching station mouth. Juxtaposed were her prematurely world-weary expression and her childish thumb-sucking while she clutched the paw of a battered teddy in the other hand. In this portion of the painting, Bron introduced a smudge of rust red. The girl's t-shirt, the teddy's breast, both blood-stained. Instead of being safe and warm with family, the youth epitomized the heart-rending poverty, aloneness and despair of kids living rough on the streets. Too easy to ignore, too important not to. It resonated deeply with Georgie and ramped up her fears for Susan Pentecost. She forced down a lump in her throat. To allay the atmosphere, she squeezed AJ's hand, whacked Bron's back and aped an art critic. The artist impresses upon us the importance of art in educating society, not merely in producing fluff to adorn our walls. In Caught in the Crossfire, she superbly expresses her anger. Page 272. At the victim's pain. She broke off to answer her mobile. Franklin here. Georgie's mood soured. She stepped away. You get home safely. Well, obviously, she replied sarcastically, perplexed by his tone. A brief pause, then Franklin reverted to his customary cocksure self. Bill Noonan filled me in on the information he'd given you about Schlicht's wife. Are you thinking of paying her a visit? Georgie played innocent. What? I figured you'd be planning to continue your gung-ho amateur sleuth tactics, instead of leaving it to the experts. What's it to you? Well, if you must stay involved, I could take you along when I visit Helena Watkovska. It'd have to be my next rest day. She pretended to consider his suggestion. Oh, when would that be? At some point this week, but I need to check the new roster. Sure. Get back to me, Georgie said ambiguously. She disconnected and smirked. She hadn't agreed to wait. Even before yesterday, sleep had been elusive, and any snatches came at a cost. It had nothing to do with the joys of shift work. Since the car and minibus accident earlier in the week, with slumber came nightmares. In a cyclic reenactment of the horror smash, Franklin moved towards the teenaged body pierced to the fence post. As he lifted the victim's head, the short-cropped blonde hair transformed. It became long, crimped tresses, framing cat's ashen, lifeless face. He screamed in the dream and jolted awake, then lay stiff, deafened by his heartbeat. He was torn between a desperate need for sleep and dread of it. Now, despite Lunny's reprimand, the imminence of a break in the Solomon. Page 273. Kate.
डियर लिसनर, यू आर वाचिंग सरमस्त पोएट्री ऑफिशियल हक की आवाज़ रूह से रूह तक। अगर आप चैनल पर न्यू हो तो चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर लें, स्ट्रीमिंग को लाइक करें, शेयर करें और कमेंट सेक्शन बॉक्स में अपनी कीमती राय का इजहार ज़रूर कीजिए। डियर व्यूअर्स, आपकी सपोर्ट हमारा हौसला है और आपकी सपोर्ट हमें सब्सक्राइबर की सूरत में चाहिए। थैंक्स टू ऑल।
Case and thoughts filled with Harvey, fatigue prevailed. He slept deeply and dreamlessly for the remaining afternoon. His intention to call Maguire was forgotten. Page 274. Sunday the 21st of March. Page 275. Chapter 33. Until this point, the hunt for Helena WATKOWSKA had been a challenge of fun use of Georgie's old law office skills, though also frustrating. Bill Noonan had mentioned that Watkovska lived outside of a town called Trafalgar, but an electronic white pages search came up blank for a phone listing. Georgie had widened it to the Gippsland area and still hit a wall. Ditto for schlicht. She then tried a Google search for the woman under her maiden name, but that had bombed too. A land title search for both surnames in Trafalgar had similar bad luck. But she wasn't surprised. Discretion would rate highly for the estranged wife of the Iceman. She wouldn't make it too easy by listing her phone number publicly or purchasing property assuming she had some in her own name. Georgie supposed she'd hide behind a company or trust if she were Watkowska, and she decided not to waste more time on that avenue. She had considered other means of finding Schlicht's ex, growing increasingly anxious. The Warrigal Citizen seemed to cover the Trafalgar area. Georgie wasn't hopeful that a newspaper based that far away would have the local knowledge needed to track Watkowska. An answering machine picked up when she tried the reception number. Then the direct line for the reporters rang out, so she'd scratched that idea. By now, she was itching for action and figured trying the personal approach couldn't be less successful than the hour she'd just wasted in her office. So she jumped in the Spider and aimed its nose away from the city, in the opposite direction to Dalesford. Page 276. Despite shit all sleep after being on the job until nearly 3:30 a.m., Franklin was sharper than possum teeth by 8 a.m. Ready to tear apart Solomon's sordid hobby, tame Georgie Harvey and her wild ideas and rip into the Pentecost case. He grabbed the phone. She owes me, it's time to settle up. He second-guessed his hunch and hung up. So far, the link to the advocate boiled down to someone with enough gumption to obtain addresses from the phone directory after picking out victims through the new Bubs column. Franklin didn't know its circulation figures, but the free paper served Dalesford, Creswick, Clunes, Trentham and surrounds. That meant it was easily available to a hefty catchment. Broaden that further if they put the announcements online these days too. He scratched his chin, shoulders slumped. Come on, think, is it just a psycho reader? Or is this cockhead connected to the paper? The pendulum of confidence returned. The breakthrough was there, on the Christmas wrap, the level of obsession, whacked out conviction, information tainted by assumptions. It all made for a gut feeling that Solomon had personal access to his victims. They'd met but superficially. A sleepy female answered his call. Hello, Jennifer, John Franklin, I've a few questions. That got her attention. What about? I'm working a case and can't elaborate at this point, but it could involve an employee of the advocate. Who? Me. He eye-rolled. No, I'm not implying you. The party I'm interested in could be on the fringe of the paper. In the classifieds, photography or printing side of things, maybe. Can you help me out? The journalist reluctantly agreed to meet at the newspaper office within the hour. Franklin disconnected and immediately dialed the number of another. Page 277. Woman with attitude. John Franklin here, he said into the receiver. At her frosty response, his pulse pounded. You didn't give me a chance to finish last night. I heard you visited the Honey Squad yesterday. Yep, you heard right. Did it go okay? He wondered why he cared. Sure, bloody fantastic, the best day of my life. Georgie burst into laughter. It rang true, not bitter. Have you run into any more trouble? She retorted, run into. He sighed softly. Conversation with Georgie Harvey was not a tiptoe through the tulips affair. It was like navigating a minefield. No more threats, break-ins. Course not, she shot back but then conceded, no, but to tell you the truth, I was with other people all of yesterday after seeing the homicide detectives. He sighed again but with relief rather than frustration. Are you leaving it up to us now? He ventured. She said vaguely. Have we finished our little chat? He hesitated, torn. His cop instincts told him not to go there, not to ask her along and encourage her meddling. On the other hand, he knew she'd butt in regardless, so he may as well keep tabs on her. Besides, company on the long drive to Trafalgar could be good. Even while he debated the sanity of including her, he heard himself say, I'm getting back to you on Helena Watkowska. I expect to see her Tuesday. You want to come along? Suspicious, he said, I don't want you going without me. Georgie's reply could have been a snigger or a snort. Look, you've no idea where this Watkowska woman fits in or how to handle the inquiry. Oh, police, she said sarcastically. Talking to someone isn't rocket. Page 278. Science. Franklin stiffened. He controlled his comeback. It might be dangerous. Consider who we're dealing with here. A marginal pause was followed by Georgie's deliberate words. I appreciate your concern, but I'll be fine. Fucking bull-headed females. Who needs them? Aloud Franklin said, oh, man. I should have known you wouldn't listen to reason. Reason. Just call me later then. He hung up and glared at the receiver. Obviously Harvey planned to see Wachowska. She could be on the road right now. His conscience hoped Harvey was right and there'd be no harm in her visit to John Schlicht's ex-missus. Yet, his darker side suggested a hostile reception may be what she needed. It might force respect for him and his uniform. So much for taming Harvey and her wild ideas. As the spider coasted towards Trafalgar, Georgie shrugged off the call from John Franklin and his suggestion they visit Wachowska on Tuesday. And she tried not to overthink her so far wasted morning and what that might mean for Susan's safety. Still shaking his head over Georgie Harvey, Franklin picked up the phone again. Hey, Hedo, Franklin here. Hey, long time, no here, his mate replied facetiously. They'd last spoken on Friday, when the sea bloke tipped him off that Georgie Harvey was at Ballarat Station. The detective yelled something incomprehensible to someone at his end. Page 279. Once Franklin held Hedo's attention, he asked, "What have you got on the Margaret Pentecost murder?" "Mate, can't talk, we've got the homies crawling up our asses here. I'll give you a buzz later today, providing things have quietened down." Okie dokie, sure, no probs. Franklin realized Hedo had replaced the receiver. He drummed his fingers and jumped when the telephone rang. "We've had a possible sighting of Susan Pentecost's Land Cruiser. It was Mick Sprague, no overtures." "What? Fantastic. Where?" "On the Ballon Road. Saw her there 3/4 of an hour ago." "Who, and why the delay?" "There's the thing, it was an anonymous report. A mail caller rang from a public phone in town." "Crank." "Possibly. Anyhow, you wanna take a ride out to Susan's place and check if she's there, while we do a whiz around and try to pick up her trail?" Franklin flicked his wrist to check the time, although he'd already decided to push back his meeting with McGuire if it came to it. "Sure, slam, stay in the loop." It was premature to feel elated based on a vague and unsubstantiated sighting of Susan Pentecost. The report could be the fallacy of a well-meaning local or a deception designed to mislead and misappropriate police resources for any number of reasons. The grimmest scenario, Susan's abductor covering his tracks. Page 280. Chapter 34. Although he recognized the lead could fizz out, Franklin felt excited as he retrieved his car from the garage. He sensed a resolution to the poison pen case and that they'd see Susan home by sundown. If he were a betting man, he'd back it on the nose. This could be the best day in a piss-poor week. He tensed at the wheel of his Commodore and scanned the landscape while flat-footing the accelerator. Time distorted. On the one hand, he seemed to arrive at Abergeldy quickly, while on the other, it took too long. Out of the car, silence struck Franklin. His earlier optimism shrank to a marble in his throat. The farm exuded emptiness and melancholy. Dread stroked his nape. His mobile provided a timely diversion. "Yeah," he answered Slam's call. "Anything out your way?" Franklin's stomach hollowed with disappointment. "Not yet, I just got here, though. I take it you've had no luck." "Bugger it, no, we're going to keep zigzagging through town. I'll let you know if we find her. Speak later." After a moment, Franklin reached through the Commodore's window. He sounded the horn for 2 minutes. A mob of white cockatoos took flight, their raspy screams abrasive. The sheep bleated and bolted along the fence line. Page 281. But there were no human reactions. He yelled, "Susan, you hear?" His words fragmented with a gust of wind and burst of rain. It didn't matter, as he verified via a short sharp search, there was no one at Abergeldy to hear him. On the bright side, he found nothing to justify his earlier fear either. Minuscule consolation. This sleepy town in Gippsland had once cost Georgie a speeding ticket and a few precious demerit points, so as she entered Trafalgar she slowed and scanned for coppers. Georgie considered the options and decided on Shirley's hair, for men and women. Everybody knows hairdressers are a fount of fact and gossip. This salon held a captive audience of blue-rinsed 70-plus ladies, along with Shirley herself, who modeled a kaleidoscopic pom-pom hairdo, garish makeup and much weathered skin. "You're lucky to find us here on a Sunday," Shirley told her. "We're all off to the wedding of the year this afternoon." The ladies let Georgie go through her spiel, including the scanty description she had from Bill Noonan, then Blue Rinsel said, "Oh, yes, we know who you mean." BR2 nodded, "You're talking about the gangster's wife." BR3 said she thought Wachowska lived out near Willow Grove or Vesper, and the others agreed. Georgie suspected they knew exactly where the woman lived, but she couldn't get more information from them. May your news be good news had been the catchphrase of one of Victoria's. Page 282. Iconic newsreaders. The newsman had perished with his wife during the previous year's horrific bushfires, yet Franklin repeated it for luck as he drove into Dalesford. He had turned the music off in case Slam called. In the unusual quietness, the soft squeak of the brake pedal and springs mocked him. Nothing's going to happen. You're not going to find her. It was a shonky report, they chanted. No news is good news, he insisted, shaking away the pessimistic voices. He pulled up outside the Advocate and caught a weird look from Jennifer Maguire. She'd seen him talking to himself. Franklin grimaced. Let's get on with this. It sounded more abrupt than he'd intended. Fine, Huffy. She led him to the office. We won't worry about niceties then, like coffee. He deserved that. Franklin laughed. Sorry, you go ahead if you want, Jen. But I'm keen to get underway. Maguire dropped onto a chair. I have to admit, you've got me curious. She'd thought already. Can't you tell me what this is about? Not yet. Will you give me an exclusive then, when you can? Maguire blushed, as if scoops were outside her journalistic realm. Franklin covered his ass. If I can. She sighed and passed him a page. Here's what you wanted. I've listed everyone directly linked to the paper's production. I haven't gone into distribution at this stage. Franklin scanned the names and job descriptions. No one jumped off the page as a would-be Solomon, reputed for aggressive behavior. Harry Notman, dog's body. 100 years old, as crooked as a builder's level and no more dangerous than mashed potato. Franklin chuckled. Rebecca Kirk, then, classifieds and receptionist. I don't know her too well. Beck's been with us for yonks but keeps to herself a bit. Friendly, though, well liked. I can't imagine her doing something. Page 283. Untoward, unless it involved splurging on the pokies. Introvert, responsible for the classifieds and the gambler, Franklin gave Kirk a mental question mark. Franklin ran his fingertip to the next name. Valerie Blight, photographer. No, I can't see Valerie, well, cutting loose enough to get...
डियर व्यूअर्स, हमारी स्ट्रीमिंग एंड हो गई है.
No, well liked. I can't imagine her doing something. Page 283. Untoward, unless it involves splurging on the pokies. Introvert, responsible for the classifieds and the gambler. Get in trouble. How's that? She's a bit uptight, that's all. Although Solomon was dangerously fanatical rather than uptight, he gave Blight a question mark, too, then moved on. Your boss, Mike Jones. You know Mike, John. You've known him for years. I know most of the people in this town. But you know Mike. If it meant a juicy story, he'd potentially cross the line, but otherwise he's pretty straight. Pretty straight. Well, if he found $100 on the street, he wouldn't rush to the police station to hand it in. But he's kept me and the others in a job, the paper running and done heaps for the community. He can't be your man. She sat back and crossed her arms. Never say can't, Franklin cautioned. Who does typesetting, copy editing, that type of thing? She laughed. You've got no idea about newspapers, have you? Mike does all the editing, I do most of the writing, with him doing the occasional piece, and we outsource the printing and distribution these days. So this is it, he flicked the page. Pretty much, Maguire said. There's Mike's youngest, Brody, who helps out. Though, help is being generous. And leading up to a special edition, everyone pitches in. But nobody else is a regular. A few others do columns or feed as sports updates and so on, but they write their rough draft and email it to Mike, who polishes it. They generally don't come into the office. Page 284. Franklin pondered. He reckoned Solomon had met each of the victims, at least briefly. It had to be one of the Advocate's core workers. Unless his theory sucked, which'd mean he'd be back to square one, the medical angle. I'll need addresses and phone numbers for Harry, Rebecca and Valerie. As Maguire scrawled the details, Franklin examined her handwriting. He couldn't imagine anything more poles apart with Solomon's calligraphic compositions. Where the poison pen writer left a large margin around his rigid words, the journalist covered all available space in a scrawling script littered with crossings out, eyes without dots and T-bars that drifted to the right. Just as he'd thought, she wasn't the crook. Thus, it was what she wrote that made him jump from his chair, saying, "Thanks, Jen. You've been a help." He left her spluttering. Because of the immediate dividends at Shirley's hair, Georgie cursed herself for not heading straight to Trafalgar that morning, instead of plugging useless searches into her computer. Then she drove until she found a pub several kilometers before Willow Grove. Plonked in no man's land with a bunch of sad-looking vehicles outside, it was surrounded by large landholdings with no visible housing. But Georgie backed herself. The second best source of inside information in country towns, after the hairdresser, was always the pub. She plumped her cleavage and courage and entered the building. She walked into a thick fog of body odor and alcohol fumes. Georgie ignored the pong and bawdy comments and propped herself at the bar. It wasn't hard to catch the bartender's attention. He was drilling along with his patrons. Guess they don't get too many women here. She ordered a pot with her best coy smile. From there, the publican melted to putty. She launched into her inquiry. Page 285. Clueless to being played, he knew Helena Watkovska and Georgie wheedled the address and directions from him. Admittedly, she'd insinuated she'd revisit for a drink. He'd get over the disappointment. The bloody mobile rang. Franklin fumbled for it without slowing his stride. It was Hedo from Ballarat's CIU. Got a tick. You want an update on this Pentecost thing? Raindrops fell thick and heavy in a fresh downpour. The temperature had plummeted. Franklin eased into the Commodore and cranked the engine and wipers. Hang on, mate, Hedo said. There were muffled sounds as his buddy covered the mouthpiece. While Franklin waited, he noticed that the inclement weather caught out tourists in short sleeves and flimsy pants or skirts. They scurried for shelter, shooting livid glances skyward. He chuckled. First sign of madness, Franklin. Huh. Talking to yourself, or laughing at your own jokes? Hedo barked a laugh. Righty-o, let's keep this fair. What are you offering in exchange for my info? I don't have time to play games, Franklin complained. Who does? Hedo retorted. Come on, I'll give you an update if you tell me what the go is with this Georgie. I really don't have time, Franklin said. We'll keep that for a beer soon, okay? The detective sighed. I suppose. He sounded like Cat, drama queen. Mate, Hedo's tone was serious now. We've had these homies in our face for days. It's driving us balmy. They don't tell us plebs much at all, you know how it is. What I do have as fact is that one Tony Scott and his pal Les Broadbent. Page 286. Left the dabs all over Margaret's house. Holy shit, Franklin squeezed his eyes against an instant headache. Fingerprints don't get inside a person's home by themselves. Recognize the names. I'll say, cronies of Schlicht. Got it in one. Besides that, it's bare bones stuff. Margaret's death is estimated at midnight, give or take 4 hours. So, even as early as 8 on Wednesday night. Yep, although everything's leaning more towards midnight or so. Cause of death was as guessed, strangulation with heavy-duty picture wire or similar. Nasty way to go and right up the alley of Scott and Broadbent. It looks like they picked the lock on the back door and took Margaret by surprise. She didn't put up much of a struggle, but then these guys would have easily overpowered her. The homies are hoping for more forensics to seal the deal against Schlicht's buddies, but reckon they'll piece it together either way. Of course, the perps aren't to be seen. Hedo flicked through a notebook or file, then continued, one of the other neighbors confirmed Megan Frawley's report of a vehicle outside Margaret's home sometime around midnight to 1-ish, and although she was equally vague, it will help make our case. Broadbent drives an F-150, which tallies with reports of a big ute rumbling like a truck. Apart from all that, there's not much else for you. Any headway on Susan at your end? Nope, I heard there have been a couple of possible sightings that have turned out to be nothing. I guess you know the hotshots from Melbourne have taken that over too. Yep, well, I'll keep my eyes and ears peeled and give you a buzz if I hear something around the traps. Okie dokie. Sure, I owe you a beer. No, you owe me two, his mate said and laughed. Page 287. Georgie took a left at the really big tree, a quick right at a bunch of roadside mailboxes, the best being the arse of a pink pig. After a hairpin bend, she steered to the right of the road's Y and traveled for about 2 minutes, wondering whether to time it on her speed or driving Miss Daisy's. Similar cryptic instructions brought her to a substantial but plain brick home bordered by 3-foot-deep garden beds. Amazingly, it matched the bartender's description. Franklin stared out the windscreen. Hedo's news rocked him. Broadbent and Scott's connection to Margaret's murder scared him shitless for Susan's welfare. It seemed that her obsessive pursuit for truth about her husband had somehow triggered her niece's demise. Worse, Susan could go the same way as Rolly and Margaret. He rejected the addendum if she hasn't already and substituted if I don't find her first. As the rain ceased, he gained a second wind. He drove the few short blocks to Camp Street and past the police station. On the same stretch was the manse belonging to the declining Presbyterian church. The original manse, that is, it had been converted into a swanky boutique hotel when Dalesford became Victoria's short-stay capital. When the novelty of running the B&B had worn off and real estate skyrocketed, the owners then split the grand building into expensive apartments and unsold. Within a stroll of that and the church was the new manse, a humble miner's cottage notable for a garden that provided a riot of color and fragrance year-round. Out the front, Franklin yanked on the handbrake and jumped from his car. As Georgie hit the doorbell, Franklin's warning echoed. She was empty-handed at the door of the iceman's estranged wife. She had left her bag, including her mobile phone, in the Spider and told no one her destination or expected return time. Worse still, so concentrated on finding Watkowska, Georgie hadn't. Page 288. Prepared a script. The thrill of adventure shifted to angst. Page 289. Chapter 35. The doorbell drew no response, likewise Franklin's bangs on the front door. Exasperated, he fought his way through a dense garden bed and had to extract rose thorns from his jeans. He peered through the living room window and bombed out. The front bedroom window yielded nothing either. He rapped on the rear door and tried its handle, then swore in immense frustration. Every time he made progress, something got in the way. Georgie focused on Pam Stewart, Ruby Padley and Susan Pentecost. 3 warm, extraordinary women, all very different. She owed it to them to persevere. Dash. A swipe of clammy palms on jeans, then she wrapped arms across her chest against the sudden autumn chill and the more invasive one inside. She inhaled. Right, I'm ready, bring it on. Franklin jogged to the church, up the steep, curved steps and into the shadows of the Gothic building. The heavy timber door sat ajar. He squeezed through it, suddenly doubting the intelligence of his bull in a china shop approach. Page 290. He scanned the empty pews, the choir stalls, the mute organ. Rich timberwork glowed with beeswax. Pungent blooms filled old-fashioned vases. A book lay open on the altar. You're either a little too late or much too early. The voice startled him. He glanced towards the pulpit and saw a smiling bloke with a shiny billiard ball crown. I'm sorry if I gave you a scare. The fellow descended the small stairway. Franklin took in the dog collar and ebony smock overpants of a similar hue. Not at all, sir, Reverend. Malcolm will do fine, the minister said and reached out to shake hands. In his civvies, unsure whether to make this official, he merely said, John Franklin. So, John, did you miss this morning's service, or are you early for next Sunday's? Perhaps you've come for private counsel. None of the above, Franklin admitted, a tad sheepish. Are you on your own here? Yes, there's just me at present. I rather enjoy this time alone on a Sunday. Just me and the big man. Sorry for the intrusion, sir. Malcolm. No, don't misunderstand. As the old saying goes, my door is always open. If it weren't for my parishioners and the community, I wouldn't have my role to play and this beautiful church would go the way of many and be sold for redevelopment. Like the old man's. Yes, Malcolm agreed. A frown tugged his brow. So, you haven't yet told me how I...
Button. Settings. Button. Dialogue. Set audio language. Button. TTS voice settings. Button. Adjust audio speed. Button. Adjust audio speed. Decrease audio speed. Button. 39%. Decrease audio speed. Button. Close. Button. Go to page. Edit box. Settings. Button. Close. Button. Play. Button.
I can be of help. Well, I hope to find your housekeeper here. Why? His tone was sharp. No trouble, I trust. Why would you say that? Adrenaline flooded through Franklin. Yes, I'm on the right track. When he'd scanned McGuire's list and spotted Valerie Blight's address as the man's, the jump seemed obvious. They sought a religious nut, where better to? Page 291. Find one. He could well have proved bloody right that to assume was to make an ass of you and me. But instead of humiliating himself, he seemed to have hit pay dirt after all. The minister cut across his thoughts. You're a policeman, aren't you, John? How'd you know that? Malcolm tapped his right nostril and smiled. Experience, intuition, and I've seen you in the newspaper and about town in your uniform often enough over the past years. Even here for the odd wedding and funeral. The men laughed, then the minister sobered. Can you tell me what the trouble is? Not at this stage, sir. Any idea of where to look? You've tried the mansion garden, I take it. Well, then, no such luck, I'm afraid. Valerie and I generally come together for early tea, but the time after service is our own. The minister took a few steps, tidied a stack of flyers and said, I'm done for the present. I'll see you out. They walked to the front door. A brief flash of lightning illuminated the granite horizon. Lost in thought, Franklin flinched when Malcolm gripped his forearm. Have you any news on Susan, John? So, the town knew that Susan Pentecost was officially missing. Surely too, then, they were aware of her niece's murder. Franklin shook his head and dodged the minister's distressed gaze. He felt guilty. He'd failed Susan and, with that, the community. If only he'd paid proper attention to Georgie Harvey first up. We prayed for her safe return this morning. She and Rolly were part of our congregation since the day they moved to Hepburn, long before I came. Since Rolly's passing, Susan seldom missed a service. Even throughout the most trying period, when I'll admit my faith wavered, she remained steadfast. He stopped. His stare magnetized Franklin until their eyes met. There's nothing that any one of my flock wouldn't do for Susan. Bring her home safe, John. Page 292. I can't make that promise. I'll try, of course, we're all doing our best. It sounded trite, even to him. But is our best as ordinary people good enough? The minister commented, more cynically than Franklin expected, or thought appropriate. I couldn't say, Franklin replied, although the question had been rhetorical. Georgie heard fast approaching footsteps. No chance to retreat now. A woman opened the main door and peered through the security screen. Hello. Hi there, Georgie said with false brightness. Are you Helena Watkowska? Yes, the woman replied. She tilted her head sideways. Ah, can I come in? I'd like a chat. You're not the media or here to sell me a thing I do not need. Georgie raised her hands. Number, it's a personal matter. Helena wavered. Please. The woman must have sensed sincerity. She admitted Georgie, although with an uncertain smile. Inside the hallway, they shook hands, with Helena returning a firm grip. She was large, more solid and sturdy than fat, and topped Georgie by 3 or so inches. Apart from a white apron, she wore a leopard print blouse and black crepe pants with black low-heeled shoes. A thin gold chain with a crucifix circled her neck. Wavy brown hair with wisps of grey hugged a strongly featured face devoid of makeup. Georgie thought handsome described Helena, and she judged her non-threatening, despite her powerful physique. With a mental slap she reserved judgment. Old-school dress style and cross hanging on her neck didn't mean much. She needed to be wary of Helena Watkowska. I was putting a cake in the oven. Would you mind? Page 293. Georgie followed Helena into the kitchen. Oddly not out of place among the blonde wood, stone and stainless steel sat an old pine rocking chair in one corner, to which Helena signaled her. What would you wish to drink? I can offer tea, coffee, lemonade, fruit juice, or something stronger, perhaps. Though she spoke excellent English, it was thick with a European accent and formality foreign to most Australians. Careful, this ain't no Pam Stewart. Georgie accepted lemonade. She watched Helena scrape the cake mixture into a tin, which stirred childhood memories. She and her sister, Erin, used to fight over who licked the beaters or the mixing bowl, especially if they were baking a chocolate cake or lemon meringue pie. That was long ago, when time stretched to infinity, before the days and years went on fast forward. Time, fast forward, the current day race against the clock. Georgie glanced sharply at Helena, who pulled up a stool beside her. Drops of rain struck the large kitchen window. It is not the most beautiful day for a drive, is it? The woman tinted her fingers. I am sure you have not driven all this way to share lemonade with me. No, Georgie admitted. Look, I don't know how to put this. She hesitated. Her host lifted her palms. The gesture implied just say it. I'm trying to locate Susan Pentecost for her girlfriends Ruby and Pam and wondered if she's been in contact with you recently. Locate Susan, Helena echoed. Not. Who is Susan Pentecost? So you do know who I'm talking about? Yes. Has she been in touch? Susan has telephoned on a number of occasions and also came to see me. Twice, as a matter of fact. She found me through a friend of a friend. It is remarkable how the country grapevine works, yes. Georgie said excitedly, go on. Well, on the first visit she came with her niece, Margaret. Helena halted. Page 294. Then queried, you know Margaret? Only in deaf didn't seem appropriate. Georgie shook her head. Well, Margaret and I did not get along. She is bossy, a bit strong. She would not let Susan and I talk freely. We found it very frustrating. It is that way with some people, is it not? Helena sighed. Susan, on the other hand, she is a very nice lady. We get along very well. Get. Present tense. Good sign. Georgie nodded encouragingly and stuffed a biscuit into her mouth. The buttery shortbread melted on her tongue. So, you see, Susan returned without Margaret, and we had a very good talk. We are already good friends. If I may say, she is quite like you, Georgie. A person with a nice feeling around them. Georgie had heard plenty of adjectives describing her. A nice feeling about her didn't top the list. Sassy, Fiery and unpredictable closely followed moody on what AJ called the Harvey scale and all preceded the more complimentary categories of sexy and smart. Was the woman bullshitting her? Why? She ignored the personal tangent. You were saying about Susan. Helena's expression hardened. She demanded, why do you ask all this? Georgie scrutinized her, still uncertain. Just trying to get in touch with Susan. Oh, Helena wasn't satisfied. Can you remember when she came to see you? Yes, of course. The first time, when they came together, Thursday week ago. We only had part of the day and a little the next morning because of Margaret's business commitments, and they were attending a dance on Friday evening. And on the Saturday, my son Michael and his girlfriend were coming to dinner. I offered to change my plans or was more than happy for Susan to join us, but she was unhappy to impose. So, she returned late Sunday morning and stayed. Page 295. Overnight, we enjoyed much of Monday together also. She promised to call me soon, to invite me to visit her home. I am looking forward to it. Helena broke off. Georgie watched emotion cloud her host's eyes. Helena's next words were tremulous. She is missing. Georgie ducked the question, by asking her own. Did she mention her plans? Not in detail. Margaret could tell you where Susan is. Georgie cleared her throat. That isn't possible. Why not? Georgie puffed her cheeks. She stammered, Margaret, well, I found Margaret. The thing is, she's been murdered. Pardon, Helena's face drained. We, her neighbor and I, that is found her 2 days ago. She was strangled, with, Georgie shuddered, reliving the discovery. It happened around midnight on, she stared at her host. Are you okay, Helena? Georgie jumped off her stool as the woman's eyes rolled and her lips tinged blue-purple. Helena. She grabbed her hand. I see. She felt a feeble answering squeeze and lowered the woman to the floor. She pushed a cushion under Helena's legs, loosened her blouse, placed her own jacket over Helena's torso and talked in a monotone. Those dreary OH&S materials Georgie had written had exposed her to basic first aid skills she'd never wanted to put into practice. 2 near faints in 3 days didn't bode well. Franklin pondered the minister's words as he sat inside the Commodore. He battled the opposing forces of worry for Susan Pentecost and obligation to apprehend Solomon. Both cases involved dangerous obsessions. One was a waiting game until they struck a lead. The other he could action without delay. He turned the ignition and tried to visualize himself as Solomon. Where? Page 296. Would she go? Franklin dialed Christina Van Hokel. No developments. Next, Taylor Berkeley. She, too, was fine, spending a quiet Sunday with her parents. He figured Solomon had already realized her mistake in targeting Lauren Morris and Renee Archer, both in long-term relationships with their baby's fathers. That left Kathy Jones. Color seeped back into Helena's skin. After a few minutes, she sat up. If you would help me off the ground please, Georgie, Helena said, her tone revealing she despised weakness in herself. She brushed away Georgie's fuss, saying, so, then you're in truth here to ask why Susan came to see me. To see how that relates to poor Margaret. But I suspect that you have an inkling or you would not be here, yes. She nodded at her own assumption. Likewise, I do not think you are very interested in all the little things that we talked about. The recipes we exchanged, gardening tips. Georgie opened her mouth. Helena held up a finger. Susan and I have much in common. We have both lived without our husbands at length and become accustomed to our own company. Oh, my son does his duty, but he rarely has time for me these days, except for Saturday dinner. I am sure you know that my husband is, the infamous John Schlicht, yes. But before he became that man, we were childhood sweethearts back home, in Germany. That explained the accent. My parents wouldn't let us marry until I turned 25, and a few years later, we migrated to Australia. Little Michael soon arrived, and we were happy for those early years. Helena broke off. She gazed through the window. Page 297. The rain fell.
My audiobooks. My audiobooks. Edit. Search your audiobooks. Create my audiobook. Read the same of it. More options. Read and more options. Read tell my more options. Read tell my audiobook. 2 hours 5 minutes 15 seconds left. Button. More options. Read tell my audiobook. 2 hours 5 minutes 15 seconds left. Button. Home. Button. Recent apps. System launcher. Chat. Settings. Chat. Recorder. My files. Keep notes. TikTok has 99 notifications. WhatsApp has 4. TikTok. Keep notes. My files. YouTube. YouTube. Create. Button. Live. Screen interrupted. Windows screen. Do you want to resume your left screen where you left off? End. YouTube.